Lord of Mystery. I am Frank Lee by author San Mu Xiao Chong chapter 91 to 114. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel. Get early access to video on Patreon. 91 Life is not easy, Frank sighs. Like a sea of stiff corpses, they were dense and piled layer upon layer, constantly forming, only to be pressed beneath other zombies. They roared and squirmed meaninglessly, wanting to break free from the sea of stiff corpses and immediately crawl to her feet. When Frank saw this scene, his thoughts instantly froze. His crouching body slowly stood up, turning stiff rapidly, and covered in lividity. Involuntarily, Frank felt that the person in front of him was intimate. He wanted to get close, to follow with fanaticism. In the next instant, Bolin City was rapidly filled with blood-red mist. The abomination, Sua saw this change, his pupils dilating, his eyes filled with shock. However, shock was shock, but Sua's speed in running away was not slow. His arms suddenly elongated, their surface covered in pitch-black slime, oozing eerie liquid, and he dove directly into the spirit world, disappearing from Bolin City. The blood-red mist did not pursue, but instead became increasingly viscous, until finally, Bolin City seemed to turn into a giant red cocoon. The thick red mist almost solidified. If someone were to look from outside the Earth's barrier, they would see a 17 or 18-year-old girl in a blood-red dress lying on the barrier. Her body became increasingly faint until she disappeared outside the barrier. Where she had been, a pile of mystical items were left behind, along with the incomplete mother nest, Saphira, and the symbol representing a pillar. Frank's mind remained stiff at this moment, watching the red mist in front of him become increasingly viscous. His body could not issue any commands. The forsaken land of the gods, a pitch-black world where one could not see their own fingers. The vision of the six people, however, was unaffected by this darkness, and they kept their eyes fixed on the man wearing a monocle in front of them. Among the six, there was Adam, George III, and other angels. None of them spoke or made a move, they just stared at each other quietly, with Aemon adjusting his monocle from time to time. But in the next instant, everyone, including Aemon, had their expressions change. It was as if the six people had forgotten what had just happened, no longer looking at Aemon before them, and quickly left the forsaken land of the gods. Aemon was left alone on the spot, his face grave. The current change was something even he had not expected, but since the other party dared to come down, that matter might actually succeed. He hesitated for a moment, then finally rushed toward Bolin City. Compared to inside the barrier, the various outer deities outside the barrier had already begun to make their moves. They did not know why the Mother Goddess of Depravity had given up the symbol of a pillar, or even her status as an outer deity. But every single thing left behind by the Mother Goddess of Depravity was worth them fighting tooth and nail over. The aftershocks of their battle caused the barrier outside the Earth to shake violently. The living beings on Earth were completely unaware of this, only feeling that today's sun seemed to be swaying gently. Twilight Hermit Order, for the first time, deities appeared at this gathering, not just one, but all 7 Orthodox deities gathered together. This was the first time the 7 Orthodox deities had gathered since breaking away from the Rose Redemption. Adam was still sitting at the head of the table, only he was suitable to sit in that seat. Adam spoke first. Why did the Mother Goddess of Depravity force her way into the barrier, even giving up the status of the third pillar and her status as an outer deity for this? No deity spoke around the long table. Adam sighed in his heart. The rift between the 7 Orthodox deities was growing wider and wider. Back when the Rose Redemption was formed to assassinate the ancient sun god, everyone had given their all, but now they could no longer sit down and talk properly. However, Adam didn't care about this and said, "The Mother Goddess of Depravity is now just an ordinary deity. This is the moment she is at her weakest. Should we kill her now? Killing her would almost eliminate the apocalypse crisis by more than half." The Lord of Storms, Leodoro, immediately replied, "Why kill her? Other than benefiting the Earth Mother, what benefit is there for other gods if we kill her now? How is she any different from everyone here now? Having given up her status as an outer deity, when the apocalypse arrives in 10 years, what will she use to resist the covetousness of the outer deities?" The god of knowledge and wisdom, Harabergen, continued, "Even if an outer deity seizes the pillar status now, they cannot digest it immediately. If we kill her, the 3 pillar sequences will gather, and no one knows what will happen. Most importantly, her interests are aligned with ours right now. Neither of us wants to see the apocalypse arrive. Besides, the damage she can cause now is limited. Then why did she force her way into the barrier?" the Evernight goddess asked. Both sides of the long table immediately fell silent. Adam concluded at the end of this gathering, let's first see what she intends to do. We will not make a move against her for now. After the outer deities digest the pillar status, then we will make a move against her. During this period, prevent her from obtaining the portion of the mother nest, Sephira on Earth. Severely injure her when necessary. And what about Mr. Door? Adam asked at the end. Evernight goddess, there is no need to pay attention to him. When Frank woke up again, he was standing straight, and his body had returned to normal. In front of him was a young girl wearing a blood-red dress. She was red from head to toe, including her hair and eyebrows. Frank understood her identity in an instant. I will live in that castle. The mother goddess pointed her dark red finger at the stone house in the plantation. She then continued, after the 10th consciousness is formed, knock on the door and call me. Do not let anyone enter at other times, I need to sleep. The voice of the mother goddess was still that of a young girl, but it carried a hint of overbearingness. Frank quickly nodded in agreement. The mother goddess disappeared from in front of Frank in an instant. After the door of the stone house closed from the inside, the stone house immediately turned red. It was quite translucent but looked slightly desolate, appearing extremely contradictory. Frank let out a long sigh and inspected his surroundings. All around him were flattened crops, with 2 large holes at the roots. Crickets were still hopping in the fields, and ants were frantically looking for their way home. The people nearby also woke up one after another, looking at the mess in front of them with confusion. Frank went over to ask and learned that they had forgotten their previous memories, which was clearly the work of the mother goddess. Frank did not explain it to them, asking them to level the land instead. At this moment, an eagle flew over. It was wearing a small vest knitted with 7-colored yarn, and a small badge was pinned to the vest. As soon as this eagle flew over, it kept circling around Frank, showing off its new vest. Won't it affect your flying? Frank asked. No, it's 7-colored, very pretty. The eagle's voice was a bit high-pitched, sounding like a boy whose voice was breaking. Since it wouldn't affect its flight, Frank didn't pay it any mind. Go, help me check if anyone is injured. Frank instructed the eagle named Baker. The eagle circling Frank spread its wings and flew off to inspect. Next to it was the plantation where grapevines were planted, and Frank walked over to inspect it. Currently, the only crops were those planted by planters. Other plantations had not yet planted food. For Frank and his group, the grapevines were undoubtedly the most valuable. Fortunately, the grapevines had not turned into stiff corpses at the time. The area south of the grapevines should not have been affected. After a while, Baker flew back, and he also brought along an Amon wearing a monocle. Frank felt a massive headache, but Baker clearly could not feel Frank's mood, and chattered to Frank. It's too miserable. It's too miserable. There are holes everywhere in the plantation. What about the people? Frank could only deal with Baker first. The people are fine. As long as the people are fine, go play by yourself. Frank sent Baker away and looked at Amon. Amon had been examining the room of the mother goddess of depravity the whole time. Frank watched him for a while before he turned his head and said to Frank, I will stay in the stone house next to it for now. He habitually adjusted his monocle. Now that the mother goddess of depravity was no longer an outer deity, Amon did not need to worry about the mother goddess of depravity making a move against him. Amon's pathway was very special. Even true gods had to be careful about having their authority stolen by him. When Amon walked into the stone house, 6 ordinary eagles immediately flew toward the stone house. 2 stood by the door, and 4 eagles stood around the stone house. They were all wearing monocles. The eagles were raised by Frank. He would select the robust ones, let them consume the archer potion to become Beander eagles, and also allow them to advance. Life is not easy, Frank could only sigh. Frank discovered that he had already digested the harvest priest potion, but his mental state was not very stable. This was likely the influence of the mother goddess of depravity's red mist. 92. Exploring the New World. In the fallen mother goddess world, over 60 people stood before Frank. Since the mother goddess of depravity had descended, he also intended to complete the 10th shadow as soon as possible. There were 2 ways to quickly complete the 10th shadow. The first was to continue bringing people into the fallen mother goddess world, but Frank did not want to do so on a large scale at the moment. The second was to have those already brought in quickly digest their obsessions. Frank intended to adopt the second method. These 60 people were the ones who had not yet digested the obsessions of their original bodies. Previously, because they had to deal with the attacks from the Loan Kingdom, they had spent very little time in the fallen mother goddess world. The few hours they did spend in the fallen mother goddess world were occupied with helping to forge firearms. Frank intended to help them deal with their obsessions in a concentrated manner today. If their obsessions truly could not be digested, they would switch bodies. When Frank learned of their obsessions, he finally understood what true variety meant. Among the first batch of over 20 people, only 4 sought revenge against the enemies who had abused them. This was easy to resolve. He simply had people tie up their enemies and bring them over. Then he handed them over to the respective individuals to be killed. The other 16 had all sorts of messy obsessions. Some wanted to marry a widow, but since Frank had wiped out the other party's tribe, where was he supposed to find that widow? Some wanted to have children and grandchildren everywhere, but that time frame was simply too long. Some wanted their wives resurrected, and others wanted to become the tribal chief. For those whose obsessions could potentially be completed within half a year, Frank let them digest their obsessions slowly. He had the rest switch bodies again. After 2 rounds of body switching, 12 out of the 20 people had digested their original body's obsessions with Frank's help. The remaining 8 should be able to digest their obsessions one after another within half a year. Frank's 10th shadow was not only completed, but the 11th shadow had also formed to about 1/10. Messy consciousnesses impacted Frank's 10th shadow. After half an hour, the 10th shadow finally figured out who it was. As soon as the 10th shadow stabilized, Frank immediately used this shadow to pass through the red thin tube and enter the new world he had discovered last time. It was still the modeled buildings, abandoned cars, and weed-choked roads. The moment he entered this world, Frank learned from his previous lesson, quickly descended to the ground, and found a building to hide in. Inside the modeled building, Frank still felt waves of unease. The sense of unease came from all directions. Damn it, why are there so many high-sequence beyonders in this world? I haven't seen a single person, no, not even a decent-sized animal. In his state of consciousness, Frank's senses were extremely acute. In the fallen Mother Goddess world, in his state of consciousness, only a sequence 5 feet hypnotist posed a threat to him, but it was nowhere near this feeling of having needles pricking his back. Just as Frank intended to peek outside the building, his consciousness immediately gave a warning. Without a second thought, Frank retreated into the red thin tube. But just like last time, Frank's consciousness was immediately grazed by something. When he returned to the red thin tube, the 10th consciousness shadow had lost another 1/5 of its consciousness. He hadn't seen anything at all, but the other party felt just like him, completely without a physical form. Counting the 11th consciousness, he now needed to replenish 1/10 of his consciousness to simultaneously drive the 10th consciousness shadow. Moreover, dying every time he went in was almost like throwing it away for free. Frank could only help them digest their obsessions again. Fortunately, there was no shortage of vessels for possessing now. The 10th consciousness was quickly replenished, but Frank did not enter the new world. He intended to ask the Mother Goddess of Depravity if there was any way to explore the new world. In Bolin City, today was the opening day of Bolin City First Primary School. Yesterday, they had walked through the gates of hell, yet they were not affected in any way. In fact, they did not remember what had happened, nor were they aware that their memories of half a day had vanished for no reason. Today was Sunday, and the army did not need to train. Zola and his wife had sent their son over early. Currently, the school only taught simple arithmetic and literacy. They taught Loan characters and used Loan textbooks. There was no help for it, Loan colonists were everywhere nearby. If they stayed in Bolin City for their whole lives, learning the characters wouldn't be of much use. Frank also lacked the ability to write textbooks in the Dutan language. If they were to expand outward in the future, he could let them serve as clerks in the administrative hall. In the end, strength was the capital for everything. As the first principal, Frank only showed his face and didn't go up to give a speech. Anything he said now would just be meaningless empty promises. Nothing was better than letting them eat their fill so they wouldn't go hungry, and not being oppressed. Frank himself wasn't sure how to walk the path ahead. He had always wanted to enable ordinary people to command spirits, but he had no clue how to do it. Before the opening ceremony ended, Frank hurried away from the scene. He intended to advance to sequence 6 feet biologist today. The separated characteristic, potion, and even auxiliary materials for biologist were not lacking. The layered, illusory sounds in his ears gradually faded, and Frank slowly opened his eyes. He had successfully advanced to sequence 6 feet biologist. His mind was suddenly filled with many biological characteristics and a lot of knowledge about hybridization. Hybridization was almost unrestricted by reproductive isolation. His hair could produce potent poison. It seemed like all the hair on his body contained potent poison, a side effect of the reversal vine, Beander item. It didn't add any means of self-preservation, and his combat power was far weaker than others in the same pathway. He was already sequence 6, but his strength had only increased, and he could use mutated vines to bind others. The vines also had limited range, he needed to use the wind or other means to spread the seeds. As for the original body's 2-cow experiment, Frank now had an idea. With the reversal vine, by using the cows that Frank and his group were currently using to lay eggs and spending a large amount of time hybridizing them with wheat, he could completely make the wheat grow seeds and eggs at the same time. But recently, Frank had established Bolin City, which allowed him to digest a lot of the original body's consciousness. At sequence 6, the original body's consciousness could no longer pose a threat to Frank. Making cows lay eggs like chickens was enough for now. He didn't intend to waste a large amount of time researching the 2-cow experiment. In fact, to achieve equality for all in the Beander world, the only means was to enable ordinary people to use Beander abilities. Frank had a clear understanding of this point. Previously, Caven commanding spirits had allowed him to see hope. But whether it was the moving street lamps, or the fire spirits in the cafeteria that could emit fire to cook food, the essence was that Caven was commanding them. Moreover, there were too few spirits in this world. Frank knocked on the stone house where the mother goddess of depravity lived. The stone house now looked more like a house made of red jade from the outside. The stone house opened from the inside. The mother goddess of depravity was still wearing a red dress, staring at Frank with scarlet eyes. Frank suppressed the discomfort in his heart and described the new world. After listening, the mother goddess of depravity said, they should be similar to wraiths. You can first possess a small animal or insect. I will refine a few human bodies, and you sacrifice them over. Then you bring me an Amen. His marauder pathway can quickly allow us to understand the new world. The mother goddess of depravity knew that Frank could not perform sacrifices in his state of consciousness. He needed to possess a body to open the red channel. Even if this body couldn't speak, it would suffice as long as it could write down the honorific name. A small animal was undoubtedly a very good choice. After the mother goddess of depravity finished speaking to Frank, she immediately moved to the front of Amon's stone house. The eagle in front of the door stretched out its wing to stop her for a moment. Another eagle flew onto the mother goddess's hand, opened its mouth, and spat out a translucent little insect with 12 completely transparent segments. The mother goddess of depravity took the insect and returned directly to her stone house. In less than a few minutes, 2 men and 1 woman were carried out of the stone house by the mother goddess. At this moment, an eagle from Amon's stone house also flew over. After the mother goddess handed the 3 people to Frank, she said, Amen, and I will chant the honorific name in 1 hour. We will separate a portion of our own consciousness, and you will guide it to the other world. But for us to separate consciousness from the spirit body and soul without causing serious injury, we also need your help. All we need is a guide, and we can control how much consciousness is separated. Our main bodies will not fall into a deep sleep. The eagle habitually wanted to raise its claw to adjust the mini monocle on its small eye, but it couldn't reach, so it could only give up the thought and nod. Frank likewise nodded to indicate his agreement. The mother goddess continued, the consciousness in these 3 bodies is almost non-existent, but the spirit bodies and souls are intact. They can be used as objects for possession and do not require digesting obsessions. Frank looked at the 3 people on the ground. Among the 3, one looked especially like Frank, but was much better looking than Frank. The other one with a thin build was clearly Amen, though he wasn't wearing a monocle. The other woman was the mother goddess of depravity, with fair skin, yet she was human. The 3 people's clothes were woven from grass leaves and were spiritual materials, so Frank didn't need to specifically enchant the clothes. Finally, the mother goddess said to Frank, your dream can find its answer at sequence 6. Don't rush to advance to sequence 5, consume a few more portions of the sequence 6 potion. It seems the mother goddess can still examine my thoughts, Frank thought to himself. Before coming here, what Frank had been thinking about was how to let ordinary people use Beander abilities. In other words, it was possible to enable ordinary people to use Beander abilities, and a sequence 6 feet biologist could do it. This undoubtedly made Frank very excited. Just as Frank intended to ask the mother goddess in detail, the mother goddess ignored Frank and only left one sentence, I cannot do it, but you can. Then she closed the stone door. The mother goddess's words left Frank baffled, but what was more important now was to quickly sacrifice these 3 bodies into the red thin tube. Chapter 93, Observations. Isaac Eggers stood before a rectangular stone planted in the ground. On the side facing inward, it was inscribed with, Balaam Empire, and on the side facing outward, it read, Loan Colony. I didn't expect to see these things called boundary markers, here, though they are quite convenient. Familiar with history, Azek identified the purpose of the rectangular stone at a glance. This could be considered one of Emperor Marcel Gustave's minor inventions, though it never became popular. The reason was that these boundary markers were easily moved. When the Intis Empire was powerful, the boundary markers would be shifted outward, and when Loan was powerful, the boundary markers would shift toward the Intis Empire. Although there were legal restrictions, with unauthorized movement of boundary markers, punishable by 3 years in prison, there were no effective means of supervision. Over time, the ranges demarcated by the boundary markers ceased to be recognized. Azek crossed the border line and immediately saw a bunker. The bunker was also an invention from when Marcel Gustave colonized the southern continent. However, after the underworld emperor fell, the Balam Empire put up no effective resistance, and since the bunkers were expensive to build, they ultimately did not become popular. Azek knew he had a connection to the underworld emperor, but he was not clear on what that specific connection was. Arriving in the southern continent also did not help him recall much of his memories. What he remembered was vastly different from this place, and the locals living in the colony lived far too miserably. In the eyes of the Loan people, this place was full of evil. They worshipped evil gods and were filled with a barbaric culture of blood sacrifice. But here, the Loan people were also devils. I should walk around more, even if not to search for memories, Azek thought to himself. Azek continued to walk and stop. Cultivation had already begun here, but he noticed that the majority of those participating in the farming were women. However, their mental state was quite good. They were unusually using bulls for plowing, the bulls were quite large and docile, and the farm tools also looked new. Upon seeing a blood-red stone house, Azek's spirit body began to warn him frantically, urging him to flee the area immediately. Azek suppressed the urge to flee and continued walking toward Bolin City. At the next plantation stone house, 4 eagles stood at the 4 corners of the roof, all wearing monocles. One of the eagles flew onto Azek's shoulder, sniffed with its beak, and opened its mouth to say, "I smell a familiar scent." As it spoke, it activated its Dream Stealer ability, stole Azek's memories, and said, "Klein Moretti." Azek felt a momentary trance. As a sequence 2, he naturally knew that the bird before him had used a Beander ability on him. Azek turned his head and looked directly at the eagle. Its body instantly turned grayish and decayed, as if it had been dead for a long time, but it returned to normal in an instant. At this moment, the red house visibly lit up, and wisps of mist seeped out, drifting toward the bird and the man. The bird said, "Rest assured, I won't go looking for trouble with Klein Moretti for the time being, provided, of course, that Frank can bring me enough benefits." After speaking, the eagle flew back to the roof. The red mist also drifted back into the red house. Azek continued walking toward Bolin City. The monocle gave him a sense of familiarity, but he couldn't recall who it was. Regardless of who it was, he knew he couldn't defeat them. Azek quickened his pace. Along the way, he saw soldiers training. Azek counted carefully and found there were over 7,000 of them, with over 6,000 men and over 1,000 women. They were all very robust, completely unlike the emaciated people in other colonial cities. Each of them carried a rifle and was full of vigor. Factories along the way billowed thick black smoke, but at the chimney openings, there were spirits blowing the thick smoke high into the sky. Some spirits might have been lazy. When they saw him staring at them, they would blow the thick smoke high into the sky, but as soon as he turned his head away, they would blow the thick smoke outside the borders of Bolin. Once caught in their little tricks, they would begin to blow the thick smoke high into the sky with great effort. Azek had never imagined that spirits could possess such high intelligence. At the very least, they had the intelligence of a 3 or 4-year-old child. He had always thought that spirits were ignorant and devoid of any intelligence, and he had only ever treated spirits as tools for combat. Everything in Bolin City almost made Azek think he had arrived in another world. Everything here was different from other places. Azek soon walked to the gates of Bolin City. The city walls had obviously been repaired, and there were people guarding the gate. "Not a resident of the Balam Kingdom, are you?" A middle-aged man guarding the gate asked Azek. Azek replied, "No." The middle-aged man pulled 2 palm-sized papers from the table in front of him and said, "Write your name on these 2 temporary identification cards. If you don't know how to write, I can write it for you." Azek reached out to take them and took a look. They only contained fields for name, time of entry, and whether one intended to stay in Bolin City long-term. Using the pen handed over by the middle-aged man, he wrote his name and the date and time on them. Under the section for long-term residency in Bolin City, he wrote, "No." The middle-aged man took a look and handed one of them to Azek. The rules of Bolin City were written on the back of the temporary identification, and Azek read them as he walked into the city. 1. Purchases made with temporary identification do not enjoy discounts. Official identification holders enjoy an 80% discount. 2. Temporary identification holders may stay in Bolin City for a maximum of 3 days. 3. Everyone in Bolin City is equal. Men and women are equal. Bullying is not permitted. If you are bullied or if you discover such a phenomenon, you may go to the public security hall. Address: 50 meters to the left of the city hall in the city center. 4. Fighting and brawling are prohibited in Bolin City. If there is a dispute, you may go to the administrative hall or the public security hall. 5. For any issues, you may go to the administrative hall. 6. Bolin City welcomes everyone who follows Bolin City's laws to join. Azek wandered around Bolin City. There wasn't a single beggar in the corners, and the houses were beginning to be reconstructed in a planned manner. The prices here were ridiculously low, all just a few copper pennies, especially for various foods. Even when using the temporary identification to purchase goods, it was not as expensive as other places. Azek took another look at the recruitment flyer on the administrative hall's bulletin board. 2 days off per week, an 8-hour workday. The wages were about the same as those of Loan workers, but the prices here were so low. In Loan newspapers, this place was practically a den of demons, with 2 leaders who were cruel and murderous, frequently holding bloody sacrifices. Before he came, he had thought that the so-called 10,000 soldiers were similar to mindless zombies. This city gave him an incomparable shock. But this city did not help him recall any of his past memories. This city bore no resemblance to anything in his memory. Except for the 2 people in the 2 stone houses at the plantation, everywhere else was practically paradise. By comparison, Tingen was more like a den of demons. Azek found the only hotel and checked in. He planned to look for his descendants here. Chapter 94, Immortal. Modeled buildings, abandoned cars. As soon as Frank appeared, ignoring the strong warning brought by his consciousness, he rushed into the sewer immediately. He intended to find a rat. Although disgusting, it was the best host body for possession he could find at the moment. Clusters of moss had already grown in the sewer, but he could not smell anything in his state of consciousness. Frank quickly found a rat at a corner and immediately performed possession on it. The possession was successful with ease. The rat had very little consciousness and very few memories, almost all of which were about finding food in the sewer. Frank did not delay. Mother Goddess of Depravity and Amen would be chanting the honorific name in an hour, and he had to sacrifice 3 bodies over here before that. Frank used the rat's claws to write down stroke by stroke. The unique consciousness that travels between 2 worlds. The creator of the second life. The controller of the red space. I pray that you open the channel to bestow. After writing these words, the rat's claws were already mangled, and Frank also felt waves of intense pain coming from the rat's claws. But his consciousness successfully connected to the red thin tube. Frank's main consciousness inside the red thin tube immediately bestowed the 3 bodies over. Frank was not in a rush to perform the consciousness transfer and waited for Mother Goddess of Depravity and Amen to arrive. In the Lord of the Mysteries world, Mother Goddess of Depravity and Amen chanted the honorific name almost simultaneously. The unique consciousness that travels between 2 worlds. The creator of the second life. The controller of the red space. I request you to open the channel between 2 worlds. Frank's main consciousness, standing within the red thin tube, felt someone chanting his honorific name. Frank followed the connection and projected his consciousness over. As soon as Frank's consciousness appeared, a shuddering fear arrived. It's fine, Frank kept hypnotizing himself. Mother Goddess of Depravity was also lying on the bed, as if she had fallen asleep. Frank used the ability of the red thin tube to guide Mother Goddess of Depravity's consciousness out of her body. Mother Goddess of Depravity's consciousness was tinged with a pale red, like pale red mist. Of course, this red color was like Ashpirit, and generally could not be seen by ordinary people. After the consciousness, which was about the same size as Frank's, left the body, Mother Goddess of Depravity actively severed this guidance and opened her eyes. Frank discovered that Mother Goddess of Depravity's consciousness was also slowly dissipating, so he hurriedly guided it to the other world through the red thin tube. Using the same method, he guided Amon's consciousness to the other world through the red thin tube. Amon's consciousness was bright white, and the outermost layer seemed to have a layer of insect membrane. The speed of his consciousness dissipating was not as fast as Mother Goddess of Depravity's. Inside the sewer, seeing Mother Goddess of Depravity open her eyes, Frank transferred his consciousness from the rat to his new body. The faint, pungent smell of the sewer disappeared. Frank moved his body and felt no discomfort. Feeling carefully, there were no obsessions in the body, and there was very little consciousness within it, which was almost immediately digested and absorbed by Frank. This body was a sequence 5 feet druid, of the planter pathway, belonging to a human transmutation product, and could not advance on its own. However, Frank faintly felt that his Beander powers were slowly disappearing. Before Frank could continue to feel it, Eamon spoke first. This world is assimilating Beander powers. In 12 hours, we will most likely become ordinary people. The lower the sequence, the faster the assimilation. Frank looked at Mother Goddess of Depravity, who nodded. It was also at this moment that Frank realized belatedly that something was wrong. I'm afraid this is not the universe where Earth is located at all. This world was not created by the Primordial One, and the cosmic rules have become different. No wonder Mother Goddess of Depravity is so easy to talk to and answers every question Frank asks. However, now is not the time to think about these things. Mother Goddess of Depravity said. While Beander powers can still be used, try to understand this world as much as possible. The three of them exited the sewer, and the street was still very desolate. Frank looked up into the distance, and the scene before his eyes made him gasp. On the buildings, one after another, transparent creatures were coiled. Some of them were huge in size, and some were even bigger than the buildings. They felt like spirits to Frank, but they were clearly not spirits. Do not stare at them, Mother Goddess of Depravity said in a low voice. Frank hurriedly lowered his head, not daring to stare at any one spot again. The three of them tried to keep to the corners of the walls and stopped in front of a supermarket. The supermarket was not big. The items on the metal shelves had rotted and were covered with a thick layer of dust. There were several human skeletal frames inside. Frank estimated that this place had been abandoned for at least 30 years. In the center of the supermarket stood a transparent figure, wearing a uniform similar to that of a shop assistant. This was the first human-shaped transparent creature the three of them had seen. Creak! Eamon pushed open the severely corroded door, and the figure did not launch an attack on them. The human transmutation body Eamon was using was a sequence 4 feet marauder. He directly used Dream Stealer to steal the other party's memories. Eamon stood in place the whole time, while Frank and Mother Goddess of Depravity kept their eyes on the transparent figure to prevent it from launching an attack. 1 minute later, Eamon said, "The memories are very chaotic, and there is almost no consciousness. He hates everyone who enters the shop and doesn't buy anything. As long as someone enters the shop and doesn't buy anything, they will be killed by him. His essence is more like a living Beander characteristic. And it's a low-level characteristic." Frank asked suspiciously, "Isn't it a living Beander item?" He had never heard of a living Beander characteristic. "No, he is not combined with any item." As Eamon spoke, he used the sequence 6 inches Prometheus ability to steal the transparent figure's ability. A deep blue spear directly appeared in his hand, emitting wisps of cold air. Eamon thrust the spear at the transparent figure. The transparent figure wanted to fight back, its hand looking like it was holding a gun, but its ability had long been stolen by Eamon. The transparent figure kept rushing up with a gibberish sound, only to be repeatedly repelled by Eamon with the spear. The transparent shadow also became fainter and fainter. After being stabbed by Eamon nearly 100 times, it finally turned into a deep blue gemstone. Frank sighed. Killing this figure is so much effort. Every shot from Eamon pierced through the figure, leaving a bowl-sized hole, and the blue ice energy froze the transparent figure stiff, but it could recover as before in less than a second. But Eamon continued, "They cannot be killed, just like Beander characteristics cannot be obliterated." Mother Goddess of Depravity said, "Not necessarily, but obliterating them would require at least tens of thousands of times. After tens of thousands of times, they will turn into the most basic Beander particles. Beander characteristics are the same. Then what's the difference between that and not being able to eliminate them?" Frank was a bit helpless to complain, but he also knew that Mother Goddess of Depravity was explaining it to him. Sure enough, in less than 5 minutes, the dark blue gemstone immediately transformed into a figure, though this time it looked almost exactly like Eamon. Eamon used Dream Stealer, again, stealing the opponent's memories. He then explained to Frank and the Mother Goddess of Depravity. Every time he forms a new shadow, he references nearby objects and people, and his rules for killing are no longer the same as before. He currently hates those who are ugly. When Eamon said this, he deliberately paused, a subtle smile curling at the corner of his lips. Sure enough, no sooner had Eamon finished speaking than the figure, which looked 70% like him, produced a dark blue spear in its hand and charged toward Frank. "What the hell, it's a locust too." Frank immediately transformed into a giant bear and raised a paw to strike its face, sending the transparent creature rolling and knocking over countless shelves. Frank felt that Eamon was messing with him. The creature wasn't attacking him because he was ugly, but likely due to some other rule. Frank used his arms to cover the lower and upper halves of his face, leaving only his eyes exposed. Sure enough, the transparent creature stopped attacking him. Frank lowered his arms, and the transparent creature again wielded the dark blue spear and attacked Frank. Frank struck its face with another bare paw. The transparent figure looked translucent, but it was solid. It felt solid when hit. However, it could fill in the large holes Eamon had just pierced by shifting other parts of its body. It might be able to shift between intangible and tangible, but it doesn't know how to use it, Frank thought to himself. Frank's physical attacks were clearly ineffective against the transparent figure. He simply pinned it to the ground with his paw and flattened it repeatedly, but the figure recovered every time. After flattening it over 100 times, the giant bear Frank had transformed into was exhausted, while the transparent figure's body had only become slightly more transparent. The mother goddess of depravity could no longer watch. A wisp of red mist drifted out toward the transparent figure, causing it to dissolve like cotton candy. A pool of dark red liquid remained on the ground, hissing continuously. The liquid gradually diminished until it finally turned back into a wisp of red mist and floated back into the mother goddess of depravity. A dark blue gemstone was left behind in its place once again. By the way, what are low-level characteristics? Frank asked, voicing his earlier confusion. He had never heard of high-level or low-level characteristics either. This time, it was the mother goddess of depravity who answered Frank's question. Characteristics that carry rules generally refer to high-level characteristics. Low-level characteristics generally do not carry rules. Things like increased strength or emitting fire or ice are collectively referred to as low-level characteristics. Eamon continued, many outer deities outside the barrier only possess low-level characteristics. They spy on the world solely to obtain high-level characteristics. If it weren't for the outer deity status, when I was sequence 6, I could have defeated them as long as they stood within 50 meters of me. Frank looked at the mother goddess of depravity suspiciously, feeling that Eamon was just boasting. The mother goddess of depravity nodded. But the mother goddess of depravity continued, in a complete world, every high-level characteristic requires countless vast low-level characteristics beneath it. But the Earth, and even the universe we are in are only forcibly elevating their status. They appear powerful, but are castles in the air. Too many lower-level characteristics, and even mid-level characteristics, are missing. Eamon is called the Angel of Time. He has touched upon the rules of time, but he only knows how to use the ability, not the underlying principles. These are all results of incomplete characteristics. Stealing time seems logical, but it is merely a forced path to godhood. Amon's abilities are still those of the potion. He is merely the person controlling the potion, or perhaps it is more like he is being controlled by the potion. The current outer deities have a maximum lifespan of only 10,000 years. But what you see is a world in its twilight. The primordial one awakens in world after world, only to split apart within them. Through cycle after cycle, the universe has made no progress. Instead, it regresses every time. Both Eamon and I have the ability to seize it from you, but we dare not gamble, fearing it might disappear from this universe. So what if one becomes an outer deity, or a pillar? Tens of thousands of years later, or hundreds of thousands of years later, when the primordial one wakes up, it will just be another new cycle. I, too, dare not speak its name, nor do I dare let more people know of its existence. Only here do I dare to mention it. We are like frogs in a well, knowing nothing about the world outside. The mother goddess of depravity had revealed almost everything, and Frank's long-standing confusion was finally resolved. Likewise, the mother goddess of depravity needed his cooperation, which was why she explained so much to him. Frank did not know if what the mother goddess of depravity said was true or false, but he was willing to believe the mother goddess of depravity's words. At this moment, the dark blue gemstone transformed once again into a transparent shadow, this time a majestic middle-aged man wearing armor. The three of them left the supermarket. There was no point in continuing to fight, and the figure did not chase after them. The trio found themselves in a dilemma. With no one to communicate with, the three of them did not know the power system of this world. Relying solely on their own exploration would undoubtedly take an immense amount of time. Furthermore, even with their extraordinary abilities, it had been quite strenuous for the three of them to deal with a seemingly weak transparent figure. Once their extraordinary abilities vanished after 12 hours, any danger could cost them their lives. As luck would have it, just as the three of them left the supermarket, a large blood-red eyeball on the second floor of the office building opposite them charged toward them. The large eyeball was as big as a small car, and the three of them dared not let it make a scene. Eamon immediately used the dream stealer ability to steal the opponent's thoughts and memories, causing the large eyeball to become momentarily sluggish and unfocused. The three of them retreated back into the supermarket. Eamon said, "This type of large transparent creature can already break free from its own preferences, which can also be called breaking free from its rules of killing." Frank asked, "What do we do now?" Following two powerful figures, Frank was like a straight man in a comedy duo, only capable of asking questions and saying things like, "Yeah, right, what now?" and, "What else?" Fortunately, the two powerful figures did not look down on Frank for being weak. Eamon said, "While we still have our extraordinary abilities, let's see if we can leave the city. It might be even more terrifying here at night." The three of them stepped out cautiously again, moving slowly along the corners of the walls. Whenever they saw a transparent creature staring at them, Eamon would use the dream stealer ability to make it forget its recent thoughts and memories. Frank saw more than once transparent creatures fighting each other, the one that one would directly swallow the loser into its body. It wasn't swallowing with a mouth, but directly placing it inside its body. As night was about to fall, the three of them finally walked out of the city. The three of them had encountered danger on the road, but since the Mother Goddess of Depravity and Eamon both possessed the bodies of Sequence 4 demigods and had extraordinary abilities, it was not difficult to handle. In the wilderness at night, Frank noticed something wrong with his body. It felt as if countless voices were appearing inside him. Chapter 96, Changing Bodies. Frank felt the voices inside his body growing louder and louder. Having seen the formation of the transparent creatures, Frank understood his situation in an instant. Although he understood, he couldn't think of any way out. The next instant, a large group of transparent creatures tore Frank's body directly apart, and his body immediately fell to pieces. Fortunately, this kind of physical attack didn't have much impact on his consciousness. As soon as these transparent creatures appeared, they began attacking each other in pairs, and some also attacked Frank's consciousness, as well as Mother Goddess and Eamon. The most powerful among them was a giant white bear, which looked 70–80% similar to the giant bear Frank had just transformed into. Mother Goddess said to Frank, "Find my original body in exchange for 3 ordinary human bodies. Beander bodies cannot be used." Frank immediately followed instructions, quickly returning to the red thin tube to notify his main body. Frank's main body was currently in the plantation conducting hybridization. Digesting the biological expert potion was not difficult. The acting method and even the acting guidelines were all about understanding living things, researching living things, and conducting hybridization. Whether it was the original body or himself, he loved researching living things and hybridization. He also had a lot of knowledge about biology. As early as Sequence 8, he had already begun conducting hybridization. He was naturally suited to the potion. Frank was no longer satisfied with researching ordinary hybridization. Things like high-yield wheat were already a bit low-level for the current Frank. Mother Goddess had made him a Beander item similar to a life radiation heart. Although it couldn't increase the life concentration of a certain area on a large scale, it could more specifically stimulate the growth of plants and animals. Not only that, he had many other means of stimulating growth. It's easy to enjoy the shade under a big tree. The fallen Mother Goddess world had a life tree, and he had plucked no less than 100 empowerment leaves from it. And even collected quite a few Beander items with growth-stimulating properties from the fallen Mother Goddess world. Plus, he himself was a harvest priest, capable of stimulating the growth of plants and animals. Now he had too many growth-stimulating methods. Frank could stimulate a small sapling into a towering tree in less than half an hour, let alone wheat seedlings. Recently, Frank had started researching how to make wheat grow on trees. Once hybridized, a whole series of other crops could also grow on trees. That way, with the empowerment leaves, they could harvest a batch of grain almost every 2 months, and tree-grown wheat itself had a high yield. Like wheat growing on trees, millet growing on trees, radishes growing on trees, and even watermelons growing on trees, and so on. Frank didn't need them to be able to survive in the natural world. It didn't matter if the wheat seeds grown from trees grew into wheat seedlings when planted. Frank and the others just needed to provide the seeds. Frank would write down how he hybridized them in the step-by-step process, including hybridization techniques that ordinary people could use, as well as those that required a biological expert to use, treating it as a discipline, rather than a simple Beander ability. As long as the first generation of seeds was produced, future generations would only need to learn and follow Frank's steps. Future generations might even be able to summarize the patterns. A pale red thin tube appeared before his eyes. Frank's main consciousness immediately transferred into the red thin tube and performed a partial consciousness transfer with his 10th consciousness. Frank immediately understood what had happened. Frank didn't linger, he immediately returned his consciousness to his body and ran to knock on Mother Goddess's door. Mother Goddess was similarly unable to communicate with her split consciousness, so she directly read Frank's memories. A few seconds later, she closed the door. After waiting for about a minute, the door opened, and Mother Goddess handed 3 ordinary human bodies to Frank. And said, "When I performed life creation, I added spirituality materials, so they can be sacrificed." They still looked similar to the 3 people from last time. In the new world, Mother Goddess directly recited the honorific name. Unique consciousness traversing the 2 worlds. Creator of the second life. Controller of the red space. I request you to open the passage between the 2 worlds to bestow them. She, too, could now feel countless voices emanating from within her body and was struggling to suppress them. Eamon was the same. Frank immediately bestowed the 3 bodies over, and at the same time, his 10th consciousness also appeared in the new world, possessing the body that belonged to him. Eamon and Mother Goddess each carried a body and immediately ran away from the city. Frank ran too slowly, so he was also carried by Mother Goddess. After running for about half an hour, when the outline of the city could no longer be seen, Eamon and Mother Goddess stopped and put down the 2 bodies and Frank. While running along the way, they also encountered transparent creatures, but they were relatively weak and fewer in number. Frank didn't know the reason for this. Mother Goddess said, "We too will run far away, then call out the honorific name and stop suppressing the transparent creatures inside our bodies. You must immediately pull our consciousness back into these 2 new bodies." Frank nodded, indicating he understood. The 2 immediately ran towards the city they had come from. More than 20 minutes later, the main consciousness in the red thin tube immediately heard someone reciting the honorific name. Following the connection, he happened to see the 2 people's bodies falling to pieces. Transparent creatures several times more numerous than those on Frank's body swarmed out, and some even directly targeted the 2's consciousness. Frank didn't dare to delay, he used the red thin tube's ability to pull their consciousnesses through the red passage and into the new bodies. The surroundings were overgrown with weeds, this should have been farmland, and there were even ridges nearby. From time to time, the chirping of crickets could be heard. The 3 of them looked at the bright white moon at night. Having no power made the 3 of them feel a bit unaccustomed for a moment. Especially Eamon and Mother Goddess, who had possessed incomparable powers since birth, but now had become completely ordinary people. Are there still living people in this world? Frank couldn't help but ask. Eamon said, "I don't know. This should be a technology-oriented world from your memories. We need to find a radio to see if we can receive any signals." Since coming to this world, Eamon had been stealing Frank's memories at every turn, and now he understood most of the memories in Frank's mind. "By the way, what right does Klein have to defeat me? Your memory clearly has problems." Whenever Eamon thought of Frank's memories now, he would repeatedly emphasize that he would not be defeated by Klein. If it weren't for Mother Goddess stopping him, Frank always felt that Eamon would try to spar with the current Klein. Frank also kept emphasizing, "If Eamon kills Klein and seizes Saphira Castle, I will absolutely never explore a new world again." Frank was truly afraid that Eamon would just kill Klein a few times. If the new world couldn't give Eamon what he wanted, he would definitely run over to cause trouble for Klein at the first opportunity. Do we have to recreate bodies?" Frank asked. In this wilderness, it was impossible to have a radio, they could only return to the city. Returning to the city in their current ordinary state definitely wouldn't work. Mother Goddess said at this time, "I think the transparent creatures should be similar to spirits. Let's find a spirit medium of the death pathway or a sequence 5 spirit warlock of the Evernight Church, and have them drive them to sea. Eamon, let's go with the death pathway." Because of the matter with Klein, he now also held a grudge against the Evernight Goddess. Caven was a spirit medium, but Frank didn't want to let Caven take the risk. This world was too dangerous. If it weren't for Frank's strong consciousness and keen perception, he would have died several times already. Caven's consciousness was weak, and he couldn't split his consciousness like Eamon and Mother Goddess. Eamon thought for a moment and said, "There is someone named Azek in Bolin City now, who is the son of Death, Salinger Eggers, and is currently a Sequence 2. Eamon also had his own ulterior motives. If Azek grew up, he would definitely deal with the Evernight Goddess." Frank asked suspiciously, "Azek Eggers?" Eamon said in a slightly mocking tone. "Yes, you're Klein's father Azek. 97, Azek's joining." Azek looked at the 3 people in front of him. He wasn't willing to believe a single word they said. All three of them could be considered notorious, but having seen everything in East Balam and Bolan City, he was also unwilling to believe that Frank had done those bad things. But when he arrived in Tingen last year, he clearly recognized him. But he lied, saying his sister was going to college, and he had to go to the southern continent. But he had been an orphan since childhood, where would he get a sister? But Azek had no choice, he could only cooperate with the three, watching as they went to see what they were really up to. Frank hadn't expected that the person he had wanted to rely on last time would meet him in this way now. Frank and the other two didn't say much, they each introduced themselves and briefly described the new world and what they needed Azek to do. Once they arrived in the new world, Azek would naturally understand. If that didn't work, they would follow Amon's idea. Eamon suggested knocking the person unconscious and, while Azek was unconscious, using the red thin tube to directly draw out his consciousness. Frank naturally disagreed, he had quite a high opinion of Azek. In Lord of the Mysteries, Frank had the best impression of Azek, even more so than Klein. Fortunately, Azek was quite cooperative. In fact, it was normal. In Lord of the Mysteries, Azek was like a father, always easygoing and never asking for anything in return. But in the end, he never escaped the cycle of falling asleep and waking up again and again. The few of them didn't have a spirit medium characteristic, but that didn't stump Eamon. The flying eagle with a monocle flew out for a while and brought back a spirit medium characteristic. It wasn't clear which unlucky person had just happened to run into Eamon. The mother goddess's speed at making life alchemy bodies was still as fast as ever. One time she made two, one spirit medium and one ordinary person. Frank, just like he did when drawing out the consciousnesses of the mother goddess and Eamon, drew out Azek's consciousness. However, Azek was always voluntarily resisting his consciousness leaving his body. In the end, with Eamon on the side constantly stealing Azek's thoughts, keeping Azek in a dazed state, Frank finally succeeded in drawing Azek's consciousness out of his body. Of course, he only drew out a portion, similar to one of Frank's clone consciousnesses. Azek opened his eyes and looked at the pitch-black sky. The white moonlight immediately made Azek think of the New World claim the three had made earlier. Could it be true? Azek still couldn't believe it. The vegetation here was lush, but the aura of death was so thick, even higher than the aura of death in the underworld. Frank began to explain in detail to Azek the current situation of the four of them, their plans for the future, and the red thin tube. Azek had already verified through several methods that this place was neither the material world nor the spirit world or underworld. And once he arrived here, he actually remembered a lot of memories. He accepted Frank's explanation quite quickly. Too many strange things had happened to him, this was nothing new. Azek led the way, and the group followed the overgrown path, intending to find a village. They didn't encounter any transparent creatures along the way. About half an hour later, they arrived at a village. At the entrance of the village, there was a transparent skeleton. The skeleton did not attack them. Azek took one look and said, "It's similar to an evil spirit, also like a spirit world creature, and yet it also looks like an undead driven by a spirit medium." Listening to Azek's words, Frank realized belatedly that these transparent creatures did indeed look like undead, but they were so strange looking that Frank hadn't made the connection. And the humanoid transparent creature in the supermarket used abilities that clearly carried ice attributes, though the ones seen later all had cold attributes. That humanoid creature was significantly different from the other transparent creatures. Whether it was its complete humanoid form or the cold energy it used. I should have sacrificed him into the red thin tube, Frank thought to himself. At this time, Azek walked forward, using his spirit medium ability to drive the skeleton in front of him. The skeleton in front of them wobbled over to Frank and the others, performing various actions. Azek said, "It can be driven, but it's very difficult. The power within them is too strong, perhaps a spirit guide could drive them easily. However, I thought of a way for ordinary people to use them. More than 1,500 years ago, in the southern continent, there was a type of spirit that was particularly weak. Ordinary people with strong spirituality could barely see their outlines and drive them." Frank was stunned when he heard this. Wasn't this the path he had been thinking about and looking for? Letting ordinary people use Beyonder powers. Azek didn't know what Frank was thinking, he continued. This kind of spirit has an ability, it can perform simple question and answer divination. But even if this kind of spirit is weak, wanting to drive them is not something an ordinary person's spirituality can support. So, ordinary people let this kind of spirit possess them directly, more like letting the spirit perform a deep-level parasitism. Aligning oneself with the spirit to reduce consumption to the minimum. What happened to the ordinary people who used the spirits? Frank asked hurriedly. He had a bad premonition. The possessed spirit cannot leave the ordinary person, it is imprisoned in the human body like a potion. Ordinary people generally cannot survive for more than half a year. Sure enough, Frank knew the side effects must be huge. Are there still such spirits now? Frank asked. Azek replied. I don't know. In the beginning, almost every village or tribe had one or two people who chose to let this kind of spirit possess them. They often brought the village good fortune, but they didn't live past half a year. Later, in order to let the village or tribe enjoy this luck, the chief or village head would force people to let this kind of spirit possess them. But to drive this kind of spirit, one needed high spirituality at the very least, so all kinds of tragedies occurred. Children generally had higher spirituality, so they made children drive this kind of spirit. But this kind of spirit didn't want to be locked in a human body, it wanted to break through this restriction. The child couldn't last for 10 days, and the spirit would escape. So they came up with a method. When the child was very young, they would torture, beat, and even directly cut off their legs and arms, repeatedly stimulating them mentally. Generally, after being tortured for a few years, they would become crazy. After the torture, the child's spirituality wouldn't drop, it would even increase. To curb this unhealthy trend, the official Beyonders of Death would annihilate this kind of spirit whenever they saw it. In a few years, this kind of spirit was almost extinct. After listening, Frank couldn't judge this matter. A knife hurts people, it should indeed be broken, but they broke all the knives. The side effects were huge, but Frank still wanted to find this kind of spirit. In Frank's view, the green silkworm spirit that Caven liked, which could automatically fertilize soil, was the most worth researching, followed by this kind of spirit. The former was the most failed spirit, it couldn't decompose Beander characteristics well. According to Frank's understanding, they sucked in a single Beander characteristic and spat it out. The latter could be considered the weakest spirit, one that even ordinary people could drive. But in Frank's view, both were most closely related to ordinary people. They were the keys for Frank to let ordinary people use Beander powers. According to Frank's understanding, a Beander characteristic had almost infinite energy itself. Because of the law of Beander convergence, they were almost impossible to split. But when humans used Beander powers, Beander particles should dissipate into the air and be absorbed by the corresponding spirits, converting into the most basic Beander particles. The most basic Beander particles then combined with each other to generate potions. Of course, these were all Frank's own guesses, he wasn't sure if they were correct. Chapter 98, Imprisonment. Azek, continue, how do we use the Beander system of this world? Eamon was quite dissatisfied with Frank constantly asking Azek various questions, and he also knew what Frank was up to. He knew most of Frank's memories, and in his view, Frank's dream was simply ridiculous. Equality for all is simply impossible, even his avatars only have equal status but cannot achieve true equality for all. Frank stopped asking questions as well. Letting ordinary people use Beander powers still had a long way to go, and it wasn't something that could be rushed. Azek continued, let's temporarily call the spirits in this world that possess cold attribute power, undead. The undead of this world can be seen even by ordinary people, which reminds me of the spirits that ordinary people can drive. That spirit also has a cold attribute and belongs to the undead among spirits. Undead and the human body are the most compatible. Since that spirit can be imprisoned by ordinary people, perhaps the weaker spirits of this world can be as well. Being able to be seen by ordinary people is the first step. Moreover, the undead of this world are essentially just Beander characteristics, and using them should be no different from us consuming potions. Of course, their own consciousness is countless times stronger than Beander characteristics. Trying to digest their consciousness is obviously impossible, they will not be willing to be imprisoned. At most in 3 months, they will be able to break out of the body. We would surely die by then because, during this process, our spirit bodies would have already been destroyed or even devoured by them. After Azek finished speaking, Eamon had already walked up to the skeleton, intending to attempt imprisonment. But he was stopped by the Mother Goddess. The Mother Goddess said to Eamon, if we encounter survivors, you will need to consume a potion to become a Beander, steal their memories, and understand their language and Beander abilities. You do the imprisoning. The Mother Goddess pointed at Azek and said. Frank did not speak, silently bestowing another one of Azek's bodies, which did not contain any Beander characteristics, into this new world. If Azek wanted to integrate with them, he obviously needed to make a contribution. Frank stepped forward and said, to change bodies, the current body must die first. When it dies, it must be quick to prevent the consciousness from dissipating too much. While the body was alive, Frank could not extract all of the consciousness and would leave a large amount of it inside the body. Only when the body was completely dead and the consciousness began to dissipate could Frank extract all of the consciousness. After Frank told Azek the steps for switching bodies, Azek did not hesitate and directly slapped his own head with his palm. The Death Pathway Sequence 9 feet Corpse Collector, and Sequence 8 feet Gravedigger, both increase physique and strength. With this slap, Azek directly smashed his head like a watermelon. The corpse swayed, fell to the ground, and red and white fluids flowed everywhere. Was Mr. Azek's personality always this violent? Frank had intended to bestow a spiritual dagger. However, Frank felt no discomfort, having experienced too many things in the past 6 months. He himself had long since become a butcher. He would be surprised or amazed when encountering events, but never terrified. He would be passive and go with the flow, but never despair. Frank immediately had the main consciousness located in the red thin tube. Extract Azek's consciousness from the corpse and transfer it into the new body. The skeleton still only watched them and did not attack them. Azek stretched his new body, walked to the front of the skeleton, and used the dagger Frank handed him to cut his own wrist. Blood flowed out slowly, and the transparent creature's skeleton finally moved. Azek was extremely close to the transparent creature's skeleton, and the blood flowing from his wrist seemed to disappear into thin air. In the end, the skeleton clearly could no longer endure the blood flowing slowly, and it drilled into the wound on Azek's wrist little by little. The transparent creature's skeleton's body remaining outside became less and less until it completely disappeared. Azek's body swayed, almost falling over, there was no color left on his face, and his whole body emitted a cold, chilling aura. There was another skeleton nearby, still wearing clothes. It was a skeleton formed after a human died, possessing no Beyonder abilities, and it could not stand up. Azek tore off the clothes from it and wrapped them around his wounded wrist. Afterward, he closed his eyes, the cold, chilling aura emitting from his body intensified, and eerie white light occasionally emerged from his body. Finally, Azek even lay on the ground, his body occasionally emitting creaking sounds and roars, and he visibly grew thinner to the naked eye. About 10 minutes later, Azek opened his eyes and said, "It's done, but if you use their power frequently, they will break free faster." But as Azek spoke, he used his ability, his body visibly withered again, and he crouched down and punched the ground. With a bang, a clear fist mark was left on the road surface. Azek stood up and said, "After using them, physical fitness becomes stronger." As he spoke, he exposed the front of his fist to show Frank and the other two. There were no wounds on his fist, considering that Azek had basically struck the road surface with full force earlier. Is the acting method useful? Frank asked. Azek, "It doesn't work, their consciousness is too vast, it can only be barely suppressed, it's impossible to digest." At this time, the body that had died with a cracked head slowly precipitated characteristics, actually precipitating 11 gray-white gems. Fortunately, it didn't directly turn into transparent creatures. Frank immediately sacrificed the 11 gems into the red thin tube. This corpse of Azek was a sequence 7 feet spirit medium, which turned into 11 types of gems. Frank had 2 hypotheses. First, the spirit medium precipitated characteristic that Eamon brought back already contained multiple sequence 8 and sequence 9 characteristics. Now, because of the decrease in spirits, the decomposer link in the potion system is missing. The formed potion materials are becoming fewer and fewer, and more people are consuming precipitated characteristics. A high sequence characteristic might contain dozens of low sequence characteristics, and as time goes on, the number of low sequence characteristics contained within a high sequence characteristic will increase. Just as when Frank promoted to sequence 7, he consumed a precipitated characteristic, the sequence 7 precipitated characteristic he consumed already contained sequence 8 and sequence 9 precipitated characteristics. He already had sequence 8 and sequence 9 precipitated characteristics inside his body. After Frank consumed it, his body contained double the sequence 8 and sequence 9 precipitated characteristics. If the owner of this characteristic had also consumed a precipitated characteristic to promote, then after Frank consumed this characteristic, his body would contain 3 portions of sequence 8 and sequence 9 precipitated characteristics. Of course, Frank guessed that using Beyonder abilities would cause Beyonder particles to enter the air and be digested and absorbed by specific spirits. However, compared to the entire potion, the amount that volatilizes should be very, very little. Second, every sequence Beyonder ability of the Lord of the Mysteries world can still be further broken down in this world. Perhaps sequence 9 could even be split into 2. Chapter 99 Inches Game. Let's go in and see if there's a radio." At this moment, Eamon spoke up. The four of them walked into the village and were immediately met with a well. A headless transparent creature wearing a red bridal gown crawled out of the well. Frank immediately thought of the Ring, but it was wearing a red bridal gown. Perhaps these transparent creatures should be called specters, Frank thought to himself. This headless female specter, in the red bridal gown, immediately charged toward the mother goddess. It was very fast, Frank could even smell a faint scent of blood. Azek immediately moved to intercept it. But Azek was clearly no match for Theospecter. Theospecter emitted a red light all around it, and Azek's movements immediately became difficult, forcing him to barely parry the headless female specter's attacks. Frank directly granted Eamon another body. This was one the mother goddess had just made, merely a sequence 5 feet Dream Stealer. The mother goddess had made a total of 5 such bodies. Eamon had consumed almost all the potions and characteristics of the error pathway, the one thing he didn't lack was characteristics. This time, Frank also granted Eamon a dagger, which had been imbued with spiritual materials. Eamon was also very decisive, directly stabbing his own heart with the dagger, and Frank immediately transferred his consciousness to it. After Eamon switched to the new body, he immediately activated Dream Stealer, stealing the memories and thoughts of the headless female specter. The headless female specter immediately stood there, motionless. The mother goddess imitated Azek's previous actions, taking the dagger from Amon's hand, slitting her own wrist, and bringing it up to the headless female specter. The blood from the mother goddess's wrist seemed to vanish into thin air, and then the figure of the female specter slowly crawled into the mother goddess's body. Perhaps it was because Eamon had stolen the female specter's thoughts, making it muddled, or perhaps it was because even without her pillar status, the mother goddess still possessed a clear understanding of the essence of power. The mother goddess did not spend a long time suppressing Theospecter, like Azek had. In just about a minute, the mother goddess's emerald green dress immediately turned blood red. Moreover, the mother goddess could float directly. Her blood-red dress, combined with her deathly pale face, made her look even more like Aespecter than Theospecter itself. The four of them inspected the village. The village was full of bleached bones, let alone people. There wasn't even any livestock of significant size, and they didn't find any other specters. In one of the houses, they found an exceptionally large radio that looked like a cupboard. Frank had seen this kind of radio before. His grandfather had one in his previous life. It was very bulky and crude, but the quality was top-notch. However, this type of radio was electric, and they couldn't use it. Other smaller electric radios were broken to the point where only the plastic casing remained. None of the cars in the village could be started either, though there was still gasoline inside. There should be a generator in the cars. Frank found the small car in the best condition, and he and Azek began to dismantle it. Frank couldn't tell the difference between a generator and an electric motor, but he figured he could just test it. Azek was very curious about things like cars and even more fascinated by the various home appliances Frank described. Steam trains and airships had already appeared in Loan, but their power source was always steam. The mother goddess took out a yellowed book and was reading it by the moonlight. Seeing the mother goddess reading so intently, Frank thought she understood the language here. But when he walked over to look, he realized it was a children's book. The mother goddess was simply looking at the pictures. Frank also picked up a book to take a look, but since there were no drawings of specters in it, he lost interest. Eamon was circling the village, using his extraordinary abilities to deduce things, but after a whole night of deduction, he hadn't made any progress. In the early hours of the morning, Frank finally identified the generator on the car, but Eamon walked into the courtyard where Frank and the others were staying, carrying a large generator. Frank felt once again that Eamon was doing it on purpose. He had discovered the large generator long ago but had just watched Frank and Azek laboriously dismantle the car, watching Frank and Azek try all sorts of tests. Frank didn't believe it could be such a coincidence. Eamon was that kind of person. Power generation went smoothly, and the old-fashioned radio worked. Eamon turned the frequency dial left and right, but all that came through was static, there was no signal. Could it be that in this world, humanity has truly gone extinct? This possibility flashed through Frank's mind. When Ji Jeong came here to inspect the night before last, he discovered a skeleton specter. Although the skeleton specter was the most ordinary strength-based specter. But the puzzle pieces for the skeleton specter were very easy to find, and its subsequent growth potential was enormous. He hadn't brought gold at the time, so he couldn't take this specter away. He intended to let his younger brother content this specter. His younger brother had just entered the game and had never contained a specter before, so he had no ability to survive in the wild, he could only let him bring it along. He had originally just bought a random inspector, with money at his spawn point to contain, but now he couldn't find the subsequent puzzle pieces, and it was complete trash. 3 months had passed, and he could only continue to contain a random inspector. Without forming a puzzle, it had almost no growth potential. But he had no choice, this game couldn't be restarted. Now that his younger brother had finally obtained an invitation code, he certainly wouldn't let him follow in his old footsteps. But when he brought his younger brother here, he found that the skeleton, specter, at the entrance was gone, and a corpse had been left in its place. There were also footprints of 4 other people nearby. This area had already been thoroughly swept by their new pavilion. This skeleton, specter, was clearly just a wanderer. In a place that had already been swept, theoretically, no one would come, which was the reason he felt safe leaving. The first thing Ji Jeong thought of was that group of newbies. He had also been so excited upon seeing the skeleton, specter, that he had forgotten a new batch of newbies had entered the game. Only newbies, with 5 people, containing such a specter, could still manage to have 1 person die. What a bunch of idiots, Ji Jeong cursed under his breath. Was this game a place where you could just die willy-nilly? The longer they played, the more they felt that this game wasn't simple. Ji Jeong decided to teach them a lesson. In fact, he even had the thought of killing these 4 people to snatch the skeleton, specter, but the penalties for killing players in this game were simply too severe. But he didn't intend to let the 4 of them go, either. At the very least, he had to give them a good lesson. If they had no backing, he would at least make them lose a layer of skin to slightly compensate for his own losses. Saying this, Ji Jeong stepped into the village. He could already hear the sound of an engine. These newbies were truly hilarious, still interested in playing with such antiques. Chapter 100, Biological Weapons. In the Lord of the Mysteries world, Frank had been worried about them. It had been 3 days since Alan and Ernan went to the ancient forest and picked up the tribesmen of Alan's tribe, and they hadn't entered the fallen Mother Goddess world. Something must have happened. He already had ideas for the hybrid wheat, but the experiments were slow, mainly due to a lack of assistance. He brought another 10-feet planter, pathway beyonders to the fallen Mother Goddess world. During the day in the Lord of the Mysteries world, he taught them biology and hybridization knowledge, and at night, he held classes for them in the fallen Mother Goddess world as well. Now, a few were finally able to help out a little. Of the first 7-feet planter, beyonders he brought, 4 had successfully advanced to sequence 7-feet harvest priest. Life itself was infinite. The Phaenopotter kingdom only believed in the Church of Mother Earth, yet so many people still went hungry, and the rank-and-file soldiers were still unable to defeat the Loan Kingdom or the Intis Republic. Frank really couldn't understand what the Earth Mother was thinking. On Frank's mental list, the first one to appear was the Earth Mother. Frank didn't plan to go find Alan and Ernan himself. Right now, a strange-looking animal was standing in front of him. This was a biological weapon he had hybridized over the past few days. In his vision, although this creature had no supernatural abilities, it had to be large, strong, and tough enough to withstand punishment. He found several creatures, armadillos, sea turtles, crocodiles, and pangolins, and hybridized them one by one with whales, cows, and ants. Today, he finally succeeded. Frank looked up and patted the head of this big guy, and it affectionately rubbed its massive head against Frank's hand. This guy was over 3 meters tall, over 2 meters wide, and 5 meters long. Its 4 legs were not long, like a crocodile's, but its head had a thick keratin layer. Its body was covered in a thick and dense layer of scales. If a rifle fired at it, it would only chip off the scales. It was hard to penetrate the flesh unless a marksman hit the same spot repeatedly. Artillery shells were also hard to cause casualties to this guy. As long as it retracted its legs under its body, given the power of current artillery shells, it could withstand dozens of them. But Frank had equipped it with a doctor, and the doctor could hide under its belly. This guy also had extreme strength. It had ant genes, although not as exaggerated as an ant. Ordinary city walls were light paper in front of it and could be shattered with a light bump. Its back was quite wide and could carry many items. At the same time, it was an amphibian, so it could also be used for maritime transport and hunting in the sea. The only drawback was that it ate a lot, consuming at least 1 cow a day. But food was the one thing Frank didn't lack. Frank called them ironclad beasts, benchmarking them against the Loan Kingdom's ironclad warships. The Loan ironclad warships only had 3, but as long as the beef supply held up, Frank could have as many ironclad beasts as he wanted. In fact, Frank had considered letting the ironclad beasts advance to Beander status, but in the end, he didn't implement it. Having the supernatural eagle was enough, and the supernatural eagle had proven itself. He wasn't really trying to arm wrestle with Lowen. Notify them, Frank said to Zola, who was beside him. The first batch of 10 feet ironclad beasts would travel through the ocean to the ancient forest. Frank intended to have 10 people directly possess the ironclad beasts with their consciousness. The bodies of these 10 people would be looked after by the doctor for these few days. At the same time, the memories of these 10 people had been locked by Eamon. As long as someone examined their memories, Eamon would be able to perceive it. In the Lord of the Mysteries world, the only ones who could examine memories were from the Marauder pathway, and Eamon should be very happy to have an extra avatar. Each ironclad beast also had a Beander sitting on its back. Hopefully, Alan and Ernan hadn't been captured or killed by George III. Otherwise, the Lowen army had better retreat back to the northern continent. Frank would let them know what a biological weapon was. He didn't know why the Church of Mother Earth didn't hybridize similar biological weapons, but he had no scruples about hybridizing this type of biological weapon. After the possession was completed, following a whistle from Zola, the 10 feet ironclad beasts marched with orderly steps, carrying the 10 people on their backs, and went rushing toward the sea with a booming sound. New World. The four of them, Frank and his group, were planning to leave the village when they bumped into Ji Jeong and his younger brother. Ji Jeong and his younger brother were clearly of Asian descent, but their skin was slightly darker, a bit like the South Asians of Frank's predecessor. Looking closely, they were somewhat similar to Azek. Eamon immediately stole the memories and thoughts of the two men, and they instantly became sluggish. Eamon had the memories in Frank's brain and was no stranger to games, but this game was clearly extremely abnormal. At the same time, in a very short time, Eamon learned the other party's language, writing, and pronunciation habits. Eamon kept stealing the thoughts of the two men, and they remained in a sluggish state. Eamon used a spirituality dagger to draw a spirituality barrier, frowned, but said in an unhurried tone. They are not from this planet, they are players. Frank was very surprised, but upon reflection, it was normal. Since he could come to this planet must be full of spatial loopholes. At the same time, Frank guessed that since people could get out of the Lord of the Mysteries world now, there should also be loopholes in the Lord of the Mysteries world. Among the four, only Azek didn't know what a player was, so Frank explained it to him. Eamon continued. In Frank's Chunabu memories, he fantasized about having a real world like a novel Protagonist, which he disguised as a game. Now, this world has been disguised as a game by someone, and this person probably isn't very powerful. Frank immediately retorted, saying, "What if it's a main god space? Also, when did he ever fantasize like that?" He clearly wanted a main god space more. You have to know that the main god of a main god space is usually very powerful, and some main god spaces will disguise the real world as a game. Eamon ignored Frank's question. Ever since he had been teased by him a few times, Frank had almost turned into a contrarian. In Amon's view, this was a typical manifestation of being flustered and exasperated. Eamon started to explain from the beginning. Their world has no supernatural powers, but the technology is already quite high. There are even the game pods in Frank's memories, which can provide a very realistic gaming experience. From birth, their bodies have been fitted with chips. The chip is both a server and a user, it can access the internet and look up any information. They also don't have any mobile phones, they can even deceive the senses and project onto the cornea, forming a similar light screen effect. Eamon touched the back of Ji Jeong's head and said, "This body has a chip. They have the ability to create bodies and the ability to disguise the new world as a game. Like task release, NPCs, etc., anything that coding programs can do, he has disguised. Of course, in the real world, you definitely can't kill monsters to level up. In their world, games that purely kill monsters to level up have already exited the historical stage. But they have identification, based on data sharing. We are not players, we must have already been uploaded to their database. The game planner has already learned about the four of us." Frank asked. "When did the first batch of players enter this world?" Eamon. "The first batch of players to enter this game has already been here for a year." The Mother Goddess concluded. "In other words, the opponent's players cannot pose a threat to us for the time being. But we also know very little about the game planner behind the scenes." Eamon said to the Mother Goddess. "His ability does not exceed the scope of what I know, whether it is creating bodies or disguising them as games. There is a high probability that he is not more powerful than you or me, and he definitely cannot reverse invade our world." At this time, Azek, who had been silently listening to their conversation, spoke up. "We have a few choices now. One is to flee from here and hide in the dark. But in this world, our supernatural powers will be assimilated, and we need to grow again. In the short term, with the strength of the three of us, we obviously cannot fight against a team. 2. Disguise ourselves as natives. But we don't know if there are any surviving natives, nor do we know if the planner has seen the natives, or how much the planner knows about this world. Disguising as natives is more difficult. 3. Seek communication. There is an information gap between the two sides. Eamon can take the opportunity to steal the other party's memories unknowingly, but it is also possible to be reverse absorbed and have our memories known. 2 of the 3 points clearly lean toward seeking communication, and also toward taking risks. This world was clearly the death pathway, which didn't have much effect on the other 3, but it was the opportunity for Azek to become a god. In this world, he recalled more memories, but this also meant that he didn't have much time left. When he recalled all his memories, he would be forced to start a new life. He had to become a sequence 1, or even a god, in a very short time, but the Evernight goddess obviously wouldn't agree to his promotion to sequence 1. Eamon nodded. He clearly agreed with Azek's words. Understanding human nature, he understood the meaning behind Azek's words. He was more willing to see Azek become a god. He would be very happy to see Azek cause trouble for the Evernight goddess. The mother goddess said in her unique girl's voice. Then it's settled. Chapter 101, Cooperation. Eamon, name. Ji Jiyoung, Ji Jiyoung. Eamon, who are you people? Ji Jiyoung, we are players. Eamon, how did you come to this world? Ji Jiyoung, what world? The game world. Eamon, where are your headquarters and respawn point? Ji Jiyoung, a small town 50 kilometers to the south. Eamon, how is the blood you inject produced? Ji Jiyoung, it's a game item. Eamon, then, can you produce this game item? Ji Jiyoung, I can't, I bought it from an NPC. Eamon picked up an item from Ji Jiyoung's backpack and asked, what about this? Ji Jiyoung, it's a game item. Eamon muttered to himself, I can't ask anything out of him, and it forced me to content a language comprehension weird. When Ji Jiyoung came to his senses, he found himself standing in front of a generator, and his brother was the same. His brother asked with a confused look, where did those 4 go? Ji Jiyoung answered helplessly, obviously, it's a big shot leading the team. But his brother's eyes were even more confused, and he asked, isn't it said that you can't die easily in this game? When they content things, don't they inject potions into their chests? Ji Jiyoung said with dissatisfaction, as long as the big shot makes money, why would they care about the life or death of noobs? When he entered the game 3 months ago, he was also scammed by so-called big shots more than once. But he couldn't earn conscience-staining money, otherwise, his brother would have had money to content a weird long ago. Frank and the other 3 walked south with the morning light. They were now going to the game's respawn point. To create an information gap, Eamon pretended to hypnotize Ji Jiyoung and asked some questions he already knew the answers to. He also appropriately revealed to the game planner that the 4 of them were weaklings who didn't understand anything. Eamon knew the other party's language because he had contained a language comprehension weird. The other party must have been watching them the whole time, collecting their information. Just now, Eamon had deliberately provided a lot of false information to them. As for whether he could deceive the other party, it depended on the extent of their mastery over this world. In the afternoon, the 4 arrived at the game's respawn point. 4 new NPCs, everyone come and see. A commotion broke out at the respawn point, and then a crowd of players swarmed over. This one wearing a monocle is so handsome. Did the planner finally consider as female players? The monocle Eamon was wearing now was not the uniqueness, just an ordinary pair of glasses made from spiritual materials. A male player retorted, if the planner had considered you female players, he wouldn't be followed by a blonde muscular man. Eamon heard this and looked back. The blonde muscular man following him was indeed Frank. The corners of Amon's mouth curled up slightly, causing another group of female players to scream. The Marauder Pathway, Swindler, had an extremely high charm bonus, and Eamon had consumed countless Swindler potions. Eamon had also quietly stolen the memories of several people, locking onto the fact that the planner was the town mayor NPC, while the other NPCs were all artificial intelligence. But the town mayor had not appeared yet, the other party was hiding from them. The 4 became fearless. What Frank and the others feared was being killed instantly, the kind where even their consciousness couldn't escape. Currently, that possibility was becoming less and less likely. Eamon pretended to be an NPC and interacted with the players for a while. The 4 waited for a long time, but the players were no longer interested in them and started moving bricks, building up the dilapidated town. More players were mining, there was a gold mine on the nearby mountain. There were also players led by various large guilds going to sweep away the weird in nearby villages. Amon's current body had been in this world for over 10 hours, and his extraordinary abilities were about to be assimilated. The four planned to leave and change bodies. At this moment, the town mayor appeared. Amon stole the other party's memories and immediately understood everything. The other party was the true native of this world, not from another world as Frank had thought. The natives of this world were sparsely distributed across the world, most of them kept in captivity by powerful, weird, had gained intelligence and needed to absorb human wisdom. They also made humans worship, weird, and help the, weird, deduce the next step of their puzzle. Similarly, there were a few human powerhouses protecting humans, but they had long since dared not gather together. They were all in single towns or villages, scattered across the world. 40 years ago, when Zuan was still a high school student, he obtained his golden finger, which could take him across to another world. That other world had already begun the era of interstellar colonization and had all kinds of miraculous technological creations. At first, he constantly learned the knowledge of that world, and by utilizing the knowledge from the other world, he quickly became a famous young genius. Later, he even received an audience and appreciation from the emperor. The Zhu kingdom seemed to have been accelerated countless times overnight, with various factories springing up. Internet, mobile phones, telephones, cars, and so on. With the emperor's support, he was taking out various inventions and data almost every day. He was called the greatest person in human history and the smartest person in the world. But one day 30 years ago, weird, suddenly descended into this world. They had all kinds of killing rules. The more people gathered in a place, the more weird there were. He instantly became a sinner of the world, and the public accused him one after another. They believed that the reason weird appeared in this world was entirely because of his inventions. By the second year, all cities had fallen, and less than 1 in 10 humans remained. Humans were merely surviving, hiding in various villages and towns. Before he was wanted by the emperor, he escaped in advance. In the third year, he used the powerful computing power of the other world to research a method to contain weird, and invented a spirit-luring potion, which greatly reduced the risk of containing weird. And he released the formula onto the internet. He was once again called the hope of humanity. But at this time, there were less than 1 million humans left alive in the whole world. By this time, the weird had also developed intelligence. Similarly, the weird began to search for him, and he was forced to disguise himself as an ordinary person, no longer daring to show any supernatural abilities. He himself had also contained a very powerful weird. His weird's rules were extremely powerful and could directly create a domain of weird. 1/5 of the weird in this world were subordinate puzzle pieces of the weird he had contained. A year ago, he might have already become the most powerful person in the world. But he could not protect anyone, and the weird all over the world were still looking for him. There were still quite a few weird in this world that were stronger than him. He could run away at any time, but the people he protected could not escape. So he set his sights on people from the other world. When people from the other world died in this world, they could have their souls pulled back to the other world through his golden finger. If Theosul was torn to pieces directly by a powerful weird, he could also create a new soul through cloning. The people he chose were all humans from the colonial planets. Their families had no ability to perform soul identification. The new souls also knew they were manufactured by humans, but they also wouldn't talk about it. Amon looked at the old man in his 60s in front of him, organizing the old man's memories, while the old man also looked at Amon. The old man knew he couldn't beat Amon. The weird inside the other party's body naturally suppressed him. But he finally decided to come out and meet this group of aliens. He possessed powerful computing power and had calculated several possibilities for why this group of people came to this planet. The old man spoke first. "You are here to recover, weird." Amon nodded. Among all the possibilities the old man had calculated, the most likely reason this group came to this planet was that they coveted these weird. He phrased coveting weird as recovering weird. Both sides tacitly understood this point. He also knew that these weird were good things. Unfortunately, they were too weak. If these weird were sent to that technological planet he went to, within 30 years, that planet's technology would once again experience a qualitative leap. In fact, he was already prepared to cooperate with the government of that technological planet. Amon continued, "We can give you the fastest help. The efficiency of the other world is not that fast, they know nothing about the extraordinary. Regarding Eamon being able to state his inner thoughts, the old man immediately thought, it's not some weird ability at all. The other party could probe memories and thoughts right from the beginning. Eamon said at the right moment, yes. This became the final straw that crushed the old man. The old man forced a smile and said, then, happy cooperation. Eamon, happy cooperation. Chapter 102, Plundering Characteristics. Eamon stated his plan directly. Eamon said, you will use the broadcast to publicly reveal your identity, and we will help you kill the powerful strangers. You also need to continue pulling in players, you only need to manufacture the chips, and we will help you manufacture the bodies. We will reclaim the cities one by one. The old man nodded. The difficulty of this plan lay in dealing with the first wave of strangers. Previously, he was unwilling to pull in more players, mainly because he was secretly cloning them in another world, taking 3 months to clone over 200 bodies. Manufacturing chips, however, was quite simple. Frank could actually pull people in too, but this world was clearly riddled with holes. The more people there were, the greater the chance their world would be exposed. Wherever one walks, one leaves a trail. If too many people walk, it becomes a thoroughfare. After the old man left, Eamon explained his plan to Frank and the others. Frank asked with great surprise, why didn't you snatch the Beander item that allows him to travel between worlds? This didn't sound like Eamon at all. Eamon certainly didn't have the moral compass of a normal person. Eamon said, the Beander item he uses to travel between worlds is essentially a strange, and the people pulled from another world are directly pulled as spirits and souls, which is completely different from how you pull consciousnesses. When players imprison a strange, their spirituality also becomes tainted with Beander attributes. Many players have already discovered that they can use Beander abilities in the real world. But a universe without Beander powers suddenly having them must have been noticed by other universes. His strange was marked 3 years ago. He thought it was as, but we don't have such strong capabilities. We must act as quickly as possible, and after acting, we must evacuate immediately. This world cannot be stayed in for long. In the Lord of the Mysteries world, Frank bestowed 11 gray stones down. The gray stones were crystal clear, with brilliant light inside. These were the precipitated characteristics of Azix, spirit medium, decomposed in the new world. As soon as Frank bestowed them into the Lord of the Mysteries world, 3 of them combined into 1, and 4 combined in pairs into 2. Ultimately, 7 precipitated characteristics were obtained, which were divined by the seer in Bolin City. Among them, 1 was a spirit medium, precipitated characteristic, 2 were gravedigger, precipitated characteristics, and 4 were corpse collector, precipitated characteristics. Frank made up his mind that next time he and they consumed precipitated characteristics, they must go to the new world to decompose the excess low sequence characteristics from the high sequence characteristics. In the afternoon, the Mother Goddess handed Frank a sequence 1 Eamon body, as well as a sequence 1 body of her own. This was almost all of Amon's current strength, except for the lack of a uniqueness. As for the 1,000 ordinary bodies provided to the new world, the Mother Goddess would make them in the new world. In Theistrange world, Stone Town, XXX City, XXX Province, establishing a human shelter base. Founder of Stone Town, Zuan. On this day, the long-lost radio broadcast played this message continuously, and countless people who heard it wept with joy. Even more strangers wanted to capture Zuan ahead of their peers. Countless strangers had gained intelligence, but their instincts had decreased. They didn't know where to find their next puzzle piece. With Zuan, they would inevitably be able to advance further. At the same time, Zuan also released a new announcement. The game would welcome an open beta, with the first batch of open beta slots being 2,000 people. The moment the announcement was released, a large swarm of strangers flocked to Stone Town. The Mother Goddess and Eamon took turns switching bodies and taking action. The sky was densely packed and layered with various strange domains. The Mother Goddess's body directly turned into red mist, shrouding the surroundings of Stone Town. The sizzling sounds were endless, and the screams and howls did not cease all afternoon. However, the red mist only grew denser. One by one, Theistranges dove into the red mist like fools. The old players watched the scene before them with excitement, dreaming of possessing this power in the real world someday. The new players were also shocked by the spectacular scene. Zuan felt the tangible pressure and trembled uncontrollably. He knew these people were strong, but he hadn't expected them to be strong to this extent. Frank and Azix loaded the gray or black characteristics falling from the sky into gold boxes. Quite a few players also helped collect characteristics using gold boxes, while some players foolishly hid the characteristics, naturally leading to their gruesome deaths. The Stranges here already possessed intelligence and had devoured countless of their own kind. They were not something this group of players could imprison. The mayor had long since requisitioned the gold boxes, and as for whether he had secretly hidden any characteristics, Eamon could steal his memories at a glance. Fortunately, there were enough gold boxes, and spiritual materials had been added to them. Frank could also pour the characteristics from the gold boxes into the red thin tube. The characteristics poured into the red thin tube would not turn into Stranges inside it. The red thin tube was highly likely a Beyonder item from the Lord of the Mysteries universe, or perhaps it had a suppressive effect. 12 hours later, it was Amon's turn to act. The mother goddess went straight to a room, stabbed her heart with a dagger, and sacrificed the pile of precipitated characteristics to the red thin tube. Frank would bestow them over, and the mother goddess would continue to make a sequence one body. 12 hours later, she would have to continue switching bodies and taking action. Amon's method of action was completely different from the mother goddesses. They began to either become sluggish or attack each other, and Eamon, like someone walking in the high sky, constantly stole their abilities and kept switching between various attack methods. Eamon did not let go of the Stranges who sensed danger in the distance and hid on the side to observe. Eamon took steps of 1,000 meters, and wherever he walked, they involuntarily joined the battle. Eamon, like throwing stones, would see a Strange beaten into a characteristic, and Eamon would teleport to the characteristic, throw it from an extremely long distance, and toss it into Frank's gold box. Frank was like a piggy bank. Once full, he would open the next one. Both the Mother Goddess and Eamon could be considered to possess charm abilities. The Mother Goddess's was likely a high-level hypnotist ability, while Amon's involved stealing thoughts and stealing distance to help them make choices. As long as a Strange came to investigate, regardless of whether they were willing to fight for Zuan, they eventually entered the Red Mist, joined the battle, and finally turned into individual characteristics. The Mother Goddess's red mist was spectacular and seemed indelible, but Eamon strolling leisurely while watching various Stranges fight in a chaotic mess was even more terrifying. The battle lasted for 3 days, and by the 4th day, no more Stranges came to investigate. Eamon and the Mother Goddess, along with Frank and Azek, began to sweep through the cities one by one. They had originally thought they would need ordinary players, but eventually, they found that they didn't even need ordinary players. Eamon only needed to walk around the city quickly, and this group of low-level Stranges, having no resistance, would start fighting among themselves. The Mother Goddess only needed to spread the red mist over the entire city and then slowly contract it. These Stranges would follow, and choosing an empty place, she would kill them all together with the red mist. The role of Azek and Frank was to bend down and pick up the characteristics. It didn't even take an hour before the Stranges in a city were completely wiped out. Their movement speed was also very fast, and there was no need to travel. 10 days later, the two of them had wiped out all the Stranges in the cities of this world. This was even with the two of them having to switch bodies every 12 hours. During this period, Frank and the others also encountered ordinary people. After 30 years, many young people had come to view the Stranges as gods. When they killed these Stranges, they would fight Frank and the others to the death. The Mother Goddess was in a hurry and couldn't be bothered with them. Eamon let them crash into the Strange statues. For him, killing these people was just a matter of convenience. The 1,000 ordinary human bodies made by the Mother Goddess, which hadn't pulled in any players yet, were burned directly by her, and all the bodies used previously were also burned. Eamon directly stole everyone's memories regarding the 4 of them, Frank and the others, completely. Frank poured oil on himself while asking Eamon, who was also pouring oil on himself, "Do you think the first Strange we encountered, which was clearly not of the undead system, might be like us?" They never found that Strange with the obvious icy attribute, and they didn't find a second Strange with other attributes either. Eamon said, "Divination can't reveal it, and I'm not quite sure. I hope we have enough time left." Frank continued to ask, "Why is it that in Lord of the Mysteries, there was only the original Frank?" Klein, in order to resist the celestial worthy's consciousness and for the sake of anchors, influenced Cuttlefish's thoughts to make Cuttlefish write the book, but why is there an extra variable like me now? Eamon replied, "Most likely, I, the only god who mastered the authority of time, snatched your, that thing, and in the end, sacrificed myself, stole time, and sent your, that thing, to the past, where it was obtained by you." That thing, naturally referred to the red thin tube. Frank curled his lip and ignored Eamon. He used a match to set his body on fire, and the other 3 did the same. The 4 bodies were just ordinary human bodies. Burning them in the end completely wiped out the evidence that they had been to this world, and Frank would not come to this world again in the future. Now, the only hidden danger was that supermarket humanoid, Strange. In the raging fire, Frank painfully gritted his teeth, not letting himself scream out loud. The moment his body was burned to death, this consciousness of Frank was guided back to the red thin tube by his main consciousness located inside it. The consciousnesses of the other three people also returned to their respective bodies with the help of Frank's main consciousness. Chapter 103, The World Changes. A huge slave ship rocked up and down with the ocean waves. Alan, Hernan, and 8 others were tied up in the corner of the ship's hold, bound tightly and unable to move. The surrounding area was densely packed with slaves, as well as more of Alan's tribespeople. The 10 of them had originally met up with over 500 of Alan's tribespeople in the ancient forest, but upon waking up, everyone except the children under 10 was already on the slave ship, while the little ones were perhaps already dead. The 10 Beyonders all had increased strength and enhanced physical attributes, but lacking means to fight against other Beyonders, they were directly ambushed. The 10 of them might not have even exposed their Beyonder physical bodies. The opposing Beyonders didn't know what kind of Beyonder ability they used, but everyone on the ship was unable to speak. In the confined space, people were constantly being thrown off the ship into the sea. To prevent epidemics, there were people patrolling 24 hours a day. As long as you had symptoms like coughing, fever, or fainting, you would be thrown off the ship. In this vast ocean, there was almost no possibility of survival once thrown off. On this ship, everyone was exhausted and hungry, but they still had to maintain the appearance of being normal people. The 10 of them insisted on not sleeping. With their physical stats, not sleeping for a few days was no problem. If they fell asleep, their consciousness would be transferred to the fallen Mother Goddess world, and their bodies would be left unconscious, highly likely to be treated as sick and thrown off the ship. Moreover, transferring consciousness to the fallen Mother Goddess world would only make Frank and Caven worry. In this vast ocean, they didn't know where they were, so it was better to wait until the ship docked and slowly seek a way to escape. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the ship finally docked. Thousands of slaves were driven like livestock to build a mausoleum after eating 2 rye breads. The 10 of them still didn't know where they were, only that it was an island. They didn't resist for the time being, as the guard was likely a high-sequence Beyonder. Alan and Hernan went to the fallen Mother Goddess world first to report the recent situation to Frank and Caven. In the fallen Mother Goddess world, Frank looked at Alan and Hernan before him. As long as the 2 of them hadn't died directly, there was hope for rescue. Frank asked, "Describe the weather, season, and temperature on the island." Hernan, "It's about the same temperature as Bolin City, but it's clearly autumn now." Frank, "It's the same latitude as Daisy Bay on the northern continent." "Are there any other characteristics?" Hernan thought for a moment and said, "The island shouldn't be large, and there are several other islands nearby." Frank searched his memory and said, "Rorstad Archipelago. Have the ironclad beasts that were looking for you search the surrounding area. The Beyonders on the backs of the ironclad beasts can all enter this world." There were currently 2 types of ironclad beasts, one type possessed by human consciousness, and the other type being ordinary, ironclad beasts. The ironclad beasts possessed by consciousness were almost all exclusive. One couldn't swap ironclad beasts at will, as their consciousness would remain within the body of the ironclad beast. If the ironclad beast hadn't died and one changed ironclad beasts, in Bolin City law, it would be punishable by 5 years in prison. Frank said again, "You had better draw a map of the terrain and find a special structure. I will send 10 more ironclad beasts, which should make it easier to find." If that didn't work, Frank would grant them empowerment leaves and have the Mother Goddess help with positioning. However, he had already been targeted by various gods. With the Mother Goddess in Bolin City, they wouldn't spy on Bolin City, but they might spy on Hernan and the others who were outside. Using the red thin tube to grant power might get discovered. Unless it was a last resort, Frank would certainly not perform the granting outside of Bolin City. Inside the plantation where the Mother Goddess's red house was located, the periphery was already completely filled with red mist. Frank had also arranged long ago for everyone to leave the vicinity. The 4 of them stood within the Mother Goddess's red mist. Today, Amon's main body had also come over. "Start," the Mother Goddess said. Frank nodded. In an instant, characteristics piled up like a small mountain appeared in the plantation. Frank had already taken out all the characteristics from the golden box into the red thin tube. Fearing that they would be granted out and stay together, directly merging into a Beyonder object. The temperature in the plantation plummeted. A sinister wind instantly blew through Bolin City, and even the Lord of the Mysteries world was swept by a sinister wind. Everyone in the Lord of the Mysteries world seemed to see illusory ghosts. Twilight Hermit Order. Today was the monthly routine meeting. Adam was sitting at the head of the table when suddenly, he sensed something and urgently left the meeting hall. Adam returned to the place where the second blasphemy slate was kept. At this moment, the second blasphemy slate was already covered in cracks, and the cracks were gradually expanding. Soon, the second blasphemy slate completely turned into fragments. The gray-black slate debris wriggled, trying to form a new slate. The first blasphemy slate held by Aemon also shattered, but compared to the second blasphemy slate, it was more severely damaged. Of course, Aemon was not concerned about the blasphemy slate he held at this moment. The gray or black characteristics began to slowly change color and shape, but the universe where the Lord of the Mysteries world was located clearly couldn't assimilate so many characteristics at once. These characteristics were only changing bit by bit. If the universe of the Lord of the Mysteries world were a CPU, I'm afraid this CPU was already running at high frequency and starting to heat up. The four of them spread out the characteristics like drying grain to prevent them from eventually forming Deander objects. After spreading the characteristics out, they placed the ones that could fuse together, letting them accelerate their adaptation to the laws of this universe and form the precipitated characteristics and uniqueness of this world. Aemon suddenly said, "Now, the true gods at Sequence 0, their anchors must be driving them crazy, right? Sequence 1s who haven't accommodated the uniqueness shouldn't be affected." The Mother Goddess replied, "The 7 orthodox gods within the barrier are fine and will be able to return to normal in about half a year. But many outer deities outside the barrier, fearing that the anchors of their believers would affect themselves, have always maintained the minimum number of believers, they should be out of control. However, they will be able to gradually regain their sanity after a dozen years or so." Aemon tentatively asked, "What about you?" The Mother Goddess said, "I have also been affected, but I have enough believers, so I am almost unaffected." She continued to say to Aemon, "Bethel Abraham, also known as Mr. Door, is probably crazy now. You can lure him into becoming a god, and when he becomes a god, replace him and ascend to Sequence 0. Frank watched the verbal exchange between the two, feeling quite speechless. Of course, it was mainly because Aemon was too mischievous. At the same time, he also sighed that Mr. Door was ultimately crazy, and he didn't know if Mr. Door was still under the Mother Goddess's control. Furs no longer had to be affected by the full moon's whispers. He didn't know if she had joined the Tarot Club now. In Frank's initial plan, he would seek to join the Tarot Club, but that clearly wasn't appropriate now. Aemon might follow his contact, climb directly onto the Tarot Club, and scare Klein half to death. Aemon was capable of doing such a thing. Chapter 104, The World Changes. Aemon was clearly able to resist the temptation of becoming a god and did not respond to the Mother Tree of Desire. Instead, he said to Frank, "You've dug so many biogas digesters and made the plantation stink to high heaven, but when are you going to use the biogas to generate electricity?" Frank looked at Aemon in confusion and asked, "Why do you care if I generate electricity?" Aemon, "I want all my avatars to research computers and study Azek's path to godhood. Adam's second blasphemy slate will likely never be usable again. My blasphemy slate is currently reforming, but it will take at least 3 years to form a new one. However, it would be best for Azek to become a god within half a year. Otherwise, once the Evernight Goddess's mental state stabilizes, she will definitely come looking for trouble. Furthermore, the Mother Tree of Desire has snatched the status of the shattered third pillar. Within a year at the earliest, she will certainly be able to fuse with it. By then, the 7 orthodox gods will have no qualms about attacking the Mother Tree of Desire." Frank, however, said, "I don't intend to generate electricity." Aemon asked, "Why?" Without waiting for Frank to reply, he stole Frank's thoughts, leaving Frank stunned for a moment. Having experienced this many times, he was immediately a bit angry. Aemon had previously promised not to steal his memories and thoughts, yet he was doing it again. Aemon clearly understood what Frank was thinking and said with a chuckle, "What does what my avatar promised have to do with my true body?" Frank couldn't be bothered to deal with him. There was no helping it, he couldn't beat Aemon in a fight, nor could he outtalk him. Frank's bottom line for Aemon now was simply not to snatch Klein's Saphira Castle. Aemon also knew Frank's bottom line and generally wouldn't tease Frank about Klein or Saphira Castle. After stealing Frank's thoughts, Aemon was clearly much more serious and said, "You also think the sudden appearance of Guays in that world is related to Zuan's inventions. But Guays are clearly the inherent Beander abilities of that universe. Besides, Roussel Gustave had so many inventions, yet he didn't make this world worse. The colonization of the southern continent was an inevitable stage of capitalist development. However, Eamon stopped mid-sentence. He had clearly thought of something. Frank said, Zuan is equivalent to forcibly elevating the world, making their country and even the world a bit deformed. Their country remains a feudal autocracy, and the new technology has become a toy for the minority. The technology belongs only to their country, there is no colonization, and there is no capitalism. Moreover, the new technology hasn't undergone any research, it's all copied by Zuan. They use whatever Zuan gives them, and they haven't even thought about cultivating the next generation. Rather than calling it new technology, it's more like they are all Zuan's processing plants. Zuan even gifted them the initial machine tools, whatever parts they couldn't make, he would just gift to them. But according to normal development laws, with mobile phones, their technology shouldn't be this low. They should have been able to find a way to contain the Guis through trial and error the moment they descended. At the very least, they could have quickly stabilized the situation, and as strong individuals grew, they would have slowly become a Beander society, instead of what they are like now, ministers hiding in remote areas with the emperor. To put it in idealistic terms, the world or the universe itself has a simple consciousness. It felt that the creatures of this world could handle the upcoming challenges and arranged corresponding monsters for you, but you turned out to be a straw bag. Of course, perhaps the Guis, or the future of that world. Eamon listened to Frank's words, thought for a while, and said, the world itself does have consciousness. The Beander powers of our world all originate from the original creator. Frank continued, I actually already have a method for ordinary people to use Beander abilities, but I'm afraid of giving the world consciousness a wrong perception. And thus having it arrange a corresponding monster for us. I just need to crossbreed spirits with ordinary animals to form animals that can digest Beander characteristics. Their essence is that of spirits, a part of the decomposers. Their inherent energy is extremely small, and upon death, they turn directly into basic Beander particles and corpses, rather than precipitating characteristics and corpses. A single precipitated Beander characteristic could be used by 1,000 of them, or even more. They have the essence of spirits but are animals. For ordinary people to use them, they obviously need their consciousness to enter these animals' bodies, and this requires the help of the red thin tube. Eamon stared at Frank as if he were meeting him for the first time. No one had ever thought about letting ordinary people use Beander abilities, yet Frank had been researching this problem all along. He contemplated the possibility of implementing this plan. In the end, he reached a conclusion: as long as spirits could be crossbred with animals, this plan could be achieved. But this series of reforms and changes was pinned solely on Frank alone, how similar it was to Zuan. In the end, Frank decided to let Amon's avatar generate electricity at his biogas digesters. Azek urgently needed to become a god, otherwise, they would be unable to face the siege of the Orthodox churches. The Mother Tree of Desire estimated that the total amount of characteristics they brought back this time was enough for 5 death pathway individuals to become gods. Although all 5 deaths would grasp the authority of death, there would be more detailed differentiation. Eamon would take most of his avatars to Odin, occupy Odin, and become Frank's neighbor. All the people of Odin would move to Bolin City. Frank would help with the planting at the plantation, while his avatars would only focus on researching computers and new sequences. Eamon had the complete set of computer knowledge in his mind, there were no better candidates for research than his avatars. In Backland, Klein used his revolver to blow off the head of the corpse in front of him. This was already the 10th skeleton he had blown up today. Yesterday, when he attended the Tarot Club, he learned that the sinister wind from the day before yesterday was practically global, even the forsaken land of the gods was not spared. Since the day before yesterday, the aura of death in this world had been gradually rising, and skeletons, stimulated by it, had been resurrecting, one after another. These skeletons were extremely sensitive to and craved the blood of living people, and they were especially obsessed with the blood of Beyonders. These skeletons were not very aggressive, some had been dead for over 100 years, and ordinary people could easily deal with them. Klein put the skeletons into body bags and carried them toward the place outside the city for mass cremation, which, in reality, was just burning them directly in the wild. The reaction of the major churches in the Loan Kingdom this time is a bit slow. Sporadic skeletons appeared yesterday, but they weren't taken seriously. Only today did they organize people to carry out a cleanup. Last night, Klein had stayed in the wilderness of Backland and encountered quite a few villages being attacked by skeletons. But the Loan army and Beyonders were slow to arrive. There was no helping it, he could only organize the villages one by one to resist, otherwise there would definitely have been casualties. Fortunately, cremation had been promoted over the years. Most of the skeletons that crawled out were missing arms or legs, had basically no combat capability, and their scratches or bites didn't carry any corpse poison. Only this morning did Klein see the Loan army and Beyonders mobilized to dig up the graves one by one and burn the skeletons inside. I wonder if my own grave will be dug up. I hope it's not Leonard and the others who dig it up, otherwise, if they see that there's no corpse in my grave, they'll probably think I've already crawled out and will start looking for my corpse everywhere. Klein smiled. It seemed he really had crawled out, though not as a corpse. Compared to the orderly way the Loan Kingdom handled the skeletons, the situation on the southern continent was much more miserable, yet the people of the southern continent did not care about those who had been scratched or bitten. Just like on the day of the Festival of the Dead, people spontaneously took to the streets and enthusiastically performed the spirit dance. However, this time there was no sacrifice by a Beyonder, so no one would be drained of their spirituality and die. The moment the skeletons appeared, Frank dispatched teams of 10 armed soldiers, with 5 teams going to each city. They would ride behind the armored beasts, travel by sea first, and upon reaching the designated cities, try their best to avoid conflict with Loan soldiers. As long as one was not afraid of these skeletons, the casualties they inflicted on humans were relatively small. However, corpses that had just been buried would cause casualties, but an adult could still deal with them by simply grabbing a wooden stick. The people of East Balam were not afraid of skeletons at all, especially those near Bolin City. Seeing moving skeletons, they instead felt a sense of familiarity, believing them to be messengers sent by death. Starting from Bolin City, Frank began to propagate the name of the new death, Azek Eggers. Azek Eggers, the son of death, would inherit the authority of death. What Frank was propagating was practically the truth. They had only known of death before, but were not clear on death's name. If Azek were to become a god, he would inevitably need anchors, so they needed to start making preparations. Accompanied by Azek, Frank brought over 100 soldiers and arrived at Shax. The people of Shax also began to grow fanatical. Skeletons with their arms and jaws removed were tied behind their backs as they enthusiastically performed the spirit dance. They had worshipped death for thousands of years, and their faith was deeply rooted. Followed by 8 armored beasts and 100 soldiers marching in perfect unison, Frank walked into Shax. Many free citizens from Shax and Odin had already moved to Bolin City with their families, and now the permanent population of Bolin City had reached 30,000. The other 10,000 were free citizens from cities near Bolin City. With Juan's management, Bolin City remained orderly, and Frank admired Juan very much. The Bolin City army also began to pay military salaries, which were quite high, and those newly arrived in Bolin City were no longer forced to enlist. At the same time, Bolin City had been recruiting, and people began to volunteer to join the army. However, the Loan army had now started to notice this phenomenon and began conducting patrols, not allowing local residents to leave the cities. In Bolin City, Frank and Azek noticed that the walls of Shax had been repaired, and there were already Loan soldiers guarding the city gates. The Loan army naturally did not dare to interfere with Frank and his group. Accompanied by soldiers, Frank and Azek swaggered into Shax. The 7 deities were likely in an unstable mental state, which was the reason Frank dared to leave Bolin City. Frank had come to distribute food, they truly had more food than they could eat, and the armored beasts were carrying high piles of food on their backs. This was even with Gale Warnard constantly selling grain to Loan, otherwise, they would have accumulated even more. Once he finished dealing with the resurrected skeletons, Frank planned to liberate the nearby cities and plantations. Bolin City had been independent for 3 months, yet the Loan Kingdom acted as if they did not exist, and the domestic media in Loan no longer reported on them. Bolin City alone could not provide a stable anchor for Azek. Frank did not do much propaganda. Azek becoming a god did not require propaganda at all. When the time came, they just needed to replace the name of death with Azek. He simply dropped large amounts of food at every street corner and arranged for soldiers to maintain order. In other nearby cities, there were also people distributing food. It was not until evening that Frank returned from Shax. This was the first time in over 2 months that Frank had not performed crossbreeding. Yesterday, Frank's Sequence 6 Feet biological expert potion had been completely digested. However, he intended to follow the mother's advice and consume a few more portions of the biological expert potion. When Frank returned to Bolin City, the mother and Eamon were waiting for them. The 4 of them went into the mother's red stone house. This time, it was the mother who spoke first. The characteristics and uniqueness have all been completely converted by the rules of this world. As expected, a total of 5 Sequence 0 characteristics have been formed. Starting from this afternoon, spirits that have never been seen before have been appearing one after another. Subsequently, throughout the world, many Death Beyonder creatures and potions will appear. Frank asked in confusion, wasn't it said that it would take at least 2 months for the sequence 0 characteristics to precipitate and form? It was only the second day. Aemon replied, the estimation was wrong. The impact on the 7 deities and the outer deities should also be very small. They should be able to stabilize their mental states in less than a month, and I fear there won't be that many outer deities losing control. The first blasphemy slate that I possess has already had 5 new death sequences added to it. As he spoke, Aemon pointed to the blasphemy slate in the corner. This was the first time Frank had seen a blasphemy slate. There were characters on both sides, written in ancient Hermes. Frank immediately looked at the Mother pathway and firmly memorized it. One would become female at sequence 2 of the Earth Mother, but Frank did not want to switch pathways. He liked the Mother pathway very much. However, he also did not want to become female, so he would see if there was a solution later. Frank then looked at the 5 newly appeared death pathways. The first thing he noticed was the Godhood ritual for sequence 0. On one of the Godhood pathways, the ritual requirement was, pull back at least one pathway from outside the universe. This was perhaps the reason Aemon showed him the blasphemy slate. This ritual almost indicated that the universe had a simple consciousness of its own, believing that you already had the ability to plunder other universes. At the same time, among these 5 pathways, there were potions for other death pathways. For example, the dried adult black spotted frog, which was originally a main ingredient for a sequence 9 potion of the previous death pathway, had now become a main ingredient for a sequence 8 feet potion of a pathway. The previous main ingredient for the sequence 9 potion of the death pathway had changed to shadow crystal. Frank did not know if the other potion ingredients for the death pathway had changed, but they had likely changed. Trying to advance using the previous potions would undoubtedly lead to losing control. The Evernight goddess digesting the death uniqueness might have also been affected. Aemon saw Frank's doubts, or perhaps he had directly stolen Frank's memories without him knowing. Aemon said, consuming the previous death pathway potions will not have any effect. The new potions have simply been optimized, greatly reducing the risk of losing control. There is actually no problem with alternating between the current death pathway potions. Frank remembered the mother's previous remarks about the world forcibly elevating its level. Aemon continued, what is being filled in now is not the lower level characteristics, but the intermediate level characteristics, and it has even reached the upper level characteristics. This universe lacks too many characteristics. The newly formed death will certainly not be as strong as the original death, but it will not be bad either. Then can Azek become a god now? Frank asked. The mother. He can, but let him advance to sequence 1 first. His godhood ritual is actually already satisfied. But it is too late for Azek to become a god now. Aemon will become a god first and make a deal with the Evernight goddess. We just need to keep one death pathway, and at the same time, we will tell them the potions and the godhood rituals. The 7 deities will easily be able to divine that we are currently holding 5 sequence 0 death characteristics, and they will not allow us to take so many pathways. Moreover, digesting the potions is also beneficial to this universe. Who knows when this universe might be discovered? 106. Aemon ascends to godhood. In Bolin City, Frank didn't need to worry about Aemon ascending to godhood. 2 days ago, he had consumed the biological expert characteristic again, and he finally understood why the mother goddess of depravity wanted him to consume more biological expert potions and characteristics. Every time the biological expert potion was consumed, his understanding of biological knowledge increased by a fraction. While there was much overlap in the knowledge gained from 2 potions, there were also differences. The characteristic from yesterday contained knowledge about microorganisms, whereas none of the previous potions had contained the concept of microorganisms. Frank looked behind him. He had already recalled all his soldiers. Standing behind him at this moment were 10,000 soldiers and over 500 armored beasts. With the waving of Kavan's command flag, the 10,000 soldiers arranged themselves into 100 phalanxes and marched toward Odin. Bolin City's public order was now maintained almost entirely by police and beyonders. The city no longer needed soldiers to keep the peace. Frank and Azek sat in a carriage. Azek had advanced to sequence 1 yesterday. Frank planned to spend 10 days driving the Lonus to the north of the colony. He intended to occupy everything below the Hagati grasslands. This was nearly 1/3 of East Balam and half of the Loan Kingdom's colonies. When Frank's army arrived at Odin, the Loan soldiers had already fled completely. Many of the Lonus in the city had also run away, but Frank did not intend to drive the Lonus away this time. However, the plantations and factories had to be under their control. Likewise, the Biander organizations had already fled. Juan led his men to quickly take over the administrative hall, issuing one decree after another. After leaving a few hundred soldiers to help Juan stabilize the situation, Frank headed toward Shax. 20 days later, George III stood on the walls of Guadala, with over 20,000 soldiers below him. On the other side were over 8,000 soldiers, and in front of them were 500 ferocious giant beasts. George III stood in a standoff from afar with the sequence 1 death on the opposite side. George III's eyes were calm and waveless, but his heart was not at peace. He cared nothing for the 500 ferocious giant beasts or the 8,000 soldiers. He intended to wipe them all out in one fell swoop at Guadala. However, Amun had ascended to godhood yesterday and reconciled with the 7 deities. The 7 deities would no longer support him, and with only Adam's support, he was clearly no match for Amun and the mother goddess of depravity. There was unwillingness in George III's eyes. He had already been preparing to ascend to godhood. As it turned out, a mausoleum had been discovered by Bolin City and completely destroyed, requiring it to be rebuilt. Now, his ascension to godhood was a distant prospect. George III took a deep look at the opposing army formation and waved his hand backward. The 20,000 soldiers also looked on with unwillingness, staring at Frank and his group with hatred as they slowly left Guadala. This was the last city that Frank and his group occupied. After George III and his soldiers left, Frank and Azek sat in their carriage and were the first to enter Guadala. The people of Guadala lived relatively well, and the people here did not welcome them. Newspapers from the Loan Kingdom were distributed here, and in them, Frank and his group were already devils. But Frank didn't care. He didn't want to kill anyone now. It would be fine to slowly change their perceptions, provided, of course, that they didn't court death themselves. The Eggers family. The man sitting at the head of the table closed his eyes. He was the head of the Eggers family, a sequence 2. On both sides of the long table, the usual tranquility was gone, replaced by a cacophony of noise. Brad Eggers listened to the words in his ears. The argument was nothing more than whether Azek was the orthodox heir. There was no death heir more orthodox than Azek. The reason those who opposed him did so was simply that the policies Azek was currently implementing did not align with their interests. In the Balam Empire, Beyonders received no special treatment. All Beyonders had to register, and anyone who registered would be given a precipitated characteristic. However, the Balam Empire would build marketplaces for Beyonder items, bringing Beyonders into the open. It did not suppress wild Beyonders and also made the acting method public. East Balam had become a colony, yet these Beyonders still remained high and mighty. The Balam Empire disliked the East Balam Restoration Society, but half the people here belonged to the East Balam Restoration Society. They kept launching uprisings for their own interests. For organizations that succeeded in their uprisings, they would immediately wipe them out, fearing repercussions from the Loan Kingdom. A few days ago, the Numinous Episcopates, artificial death faction, defected to Azek. At least 1/6 of the members were killed for participating in living sacrifices. Now, defecting over there was no guarantee that they wouldn't be one of the ones killed. But if they didn't defect now, the number killed later would be more than 1/6. What they were gambling on now was simply whether Azek could truly ascend to godhood. Azek had not sought out the Eggers family until now, clearly indicating he would not give them special treatment. The sound of the argument grew quieter. Brad Eggers opened his eyes and said, "The Eggers family is dissolved from this day forward. Seek to join the Balam Empire's official Beyonder organizations. Those who do not wish to join will not be forced." As soon as Brad Eggers finished speaking, the people on both sides of the long table questioned him, and a few people left directly, clearly unwilling to stay here. Brad Eggers was not surprised. In truth, the Eggers family had long since lost its cohesion and had similarly turned into a means for individuals to seek their own interests. Loan Kingdom, Tingen. As the bell for the end of class rang, the teacher on the podium today did not leave in a hurry. Yasmin looked at today's teacher a bit strangely. He clearly wasn't wearing glasses, yet he had just made a motion of adjusting his glasses. What the teacher said next also surprised her. "You've all heard about the situation in East Balam, right? The Loan Kingdom has recognized the Balam Empire. Graduation is in half a month. The Balam Empire offers free tuition, a weekly salary of £1, and free room and board. Those who want to go to the Balam Empire can sign up with me. You don't even need to pay for your own travel expenses." Yasmin had no money to attend university, and the Balam Empire's free tuition immediately tempted her. However, from beginning to end, she didn't tell her family about going to East Balam. She only signed up with the teacher. The teacher provided her with the travel expenses to Bolin City. She seemed unable to wait for graduation, and the very next day, she immediately bought a ticket on a ship to East Balam. The ship was pulled by 4 strange animals, but she didn't feel it was strange. And there were quite a few people like her. In the Loan Kingdom, Intis Republic, Phaenopotter Kingdom, and Phasak Empire, on this day, many students were traveling alone, funded by their teachers, taking various means of transport toward Bolan City in East Balam. Odin. Frank looked at so many Amans wearing monocles, his scalp tingling slightly. Frank used his hand to support the area around his eyes and let out a long sigh of relief. It was fortunate that he wasn't wearing a monocle. Frank opened his mouth and asked Amon's true body, "When are my students arriving?" Amon adjusted his monocle and said, "Didn't you say it was immoral to influence them? Why are you asking me now?" Frank. "Since the immoral thing has already been done, naturally I want to see the results quickly." Amon. "So, what exactly is this morality?" 2 days later, Frank finally saw his students who had come from all over the world. A few days ago, Amon still wanted to continue researching computers, but he discovered that he actually lacked knowledgeable avatars. After he advanced to Sequence 0, he could almost teleport, so he found a large number of knowledgeable teachers across the world to make into avatars. He promised to use psychological suggestion to find a batch of students. Frank thought a batch meant a dozen or a few dozen, but he hadn't expected Amon to directly swindle several thousand students for him using the teachers. Frank had to have one step in to help him arrange these several thousand students in Bolan City, and Bolan City instantly became the world's #1 university. However, Amon said the psychological suggestion would wear off in 1 month. When that time came, without the influence of the psychological suggestion, it was unknown how many would be able to stay. They didn't know that after being subjected to psychological suggestion, they would only feel that they had made a wrong decision at the time. Frank had been having people compile knowledge-based Beyonder abilities. Like his own hybridization techniques and biological knowledge, he had been writing books constantly. He directly had the corresponding Beyonders teach them knowledge that could be learned without potions. Frank was not short of Beyonders now, whether they were the ones he had cultivated himself or those who had joined later. Half a year later, Frank was still a Sequence 6 inches biological expert, but he had consumed no less than 20 inches biological expert characteristics. He had a comprehensive understanding of the characteristics of the creatures on Earth, whether they were Beyonder creatures or spirits. Biological habits, reproductive methods, biological DNA, and even their souls, this was the power of the potion. At the same time, one did not need potions to learn these things. The potion was a bestowal. Without the potion, they could still learn, but it would require learning slowly, bit by bit. Of course, the hybridization granted by the biological expert potion could ignore reproductive isolation, which was something that could not be solved no matter how much one learned. Frank walked up to a pot, poured food and water into it, and said, "Heat." Small flames began to emerge from under the pot. It had taken Frank a full half-year to make this pot. He had originally intended to use spirits and animals to hybridize a creature that could produce fire. This creature was essentially a spirit, but it could be seen by ordinary people. Then, an ordinary person's consciousness could enter it, allowing them to use Beyonder abilities. Hybridizing such creatures was not difficult, he had succeeded very easily. Frank had artisans add sand and soil around it, completely turning it into a stove, with only a pot needing to be placed on top. People could cook without needing fuel. However, for ordinary people to use this pot, they needed to transfer their consciousness, but consciousness transfer required falling asleep. Sleeping just to use a pot was clearly inappropriate. Consciousness transfer was only suitable for large bodies, like the previous armored beasts. In daily life, consciousness transfer was clearly not suitable. So, Frank tried his best to hybridize them smaller, letting them form swarm intelligence. One had no thoughts, but a group together possessed thoughts. There were many such creatures in nature. A single army ant possessed no intelligence and not even vision, but hundreds of thousands of army ants, with no one in control and no commander, could form a long ant bridge to cross a great distance. The pot Frank created was of this type. Its essence was still a spirit, but the huge number allowed them to understand simple instructions. Frank could have originally hybridized an animal with high intelligence that could complete various instructions, but the higher the intelligence, the harder it was to control, and it was more prone to having its own ideas. The hidden dangers of swarm intelligence were very small. Frank did not intend to invent subsequent things, he would only write the knowledge used into books and let them do the inventing. 6 months ago, Frank's 11th consciousness had formed, but Frank's true body could not contact it. He only knew that the 11th consciousness still existed. Frank did not understand what was on the other side. There was no difference between the split consciousness and the main consciousness. Things the split consciousness could not solve, the main consciousness could not solve either. Chapter 107, Rebirth. Fengwu World, Little Desolate Region. In a large room, a middle-aged man with a fierce, fleshy face said, "Zhang Wei, you've seen your own grades at Heavenly Palace Academy, you're at the bottom of the class. It's not that your uncle isn't giving you a chance. Back then, the sect took in your father, you, and me. You were only 1 year old back then. Your father left early, and I watched you grow up. Your father must have left you quite a bit of money. Your father's ability was recognized by several of us brothers. You are still too young. Don't be overly ambitious, and you should also think about what others think of you. Besides, what you learn at Heavenly Palace Academy might not necessarily be useful in our little desolate region. I suggest you start by learning from a formation position. After 20 or 30 years, if you lack the ability, I can still help you secure an assistant position." Zhang Wei listened to the exact same rhetoric as in his memories. How stupid he had been in his past life, thinking so highly of others, actually hearing concern in those words. There wasn't a hint of concern in those words, it was entirely mocking, layered with barbs. Had he ever tested him on professional knowledge? If not for the Heavenly Palace Academy's regulation that no sect could refuse an applicant who was a student of Heavenly Palace Academy, he probably wouldn't even have been able to enter this door. The other party was named Li Yi, the assistant to the sect's array master. Zhang Wei couldn't be bothered to waste words with him and left the room directly. As he was leaving, Zhang Wei heard the middle-aged fatty say from behind, "Once you leave this door, don't come back." This sect made him sick, and Zhang Wei quickened his pace. Bah, what a piece of work. He really thinks he's some top student from Heavenly Palace Academy. Having lived for 100 years, Zhang Wei had long understood not to put himself in danger. He didn't look back at the mockery and insults behind him. If he argued with him, he would only be secretly buried, and the other party would face no punishment within this sect. The road ahead was long. This time, it wouldn't be the demonic beasts that destroyed the sect, Zhang Wei would do it himself. Walking out of the door, looking at the sect before him, after 100 years, his memories of the sect had long become blurred. He had woken up this morning and discovered he hadn't died, but had been reborn from 100 years in the future. Touching his neck, there was still a phantom pain. Zhang Wei sighed slightly. The members of his sect must have all been killed. Discovering he had been reborn, he was truly curious why he had chosen to become a formation position master in the first place, acting as a nanny for others. That was why he went to apply for the job just like in his past life. It was a real nanny job, he was just an assistant to the formation position master. Zhang Wei recalled his father's dying words again. His father wanted him to become a formation master at Heavenly Palace Academy and led this sect to glory. At the time, he thought he would slowly make achievements as a formation position master, and the sect leader would eventually notice him. But everyone in the sect was cut from the same cloth. His past self was truly ridiculous to the extreme. He had been a nanny for that person for 10 years, the one known as the once-in-a-millennium genius in the little desolate region. That person was living it up with beauties in his arms. Zhang Wei recalled the series of events that followed, and his chest still felt tight to this day. "It's fine, they will all die by my own hands." Zhang Wei murmured softly. Just as Zhang Wei intended to go down the mountain and leave this sect, he suddenly thought of something. After observing his surroundings and finding no one, Zhang Wei walked toward a small path. The path hadn't been walked on for a long time and was overgrown with weeds. Soon, Zhang Wei reached the edge of a cliff and jumped straight down. Water splashed everywhere. Zhang Wei swam to the shore and used his ability to instantly dry his dripping clothes, then walked to a narrow cave hidden by weeds and bushes. The cave was very clean. It was a cave his father had helped him open when he was a child, so he could swim in the lake during the summer. His father had spoiled him to the extreme and protected him too well, keeping him carefree and without any worries. Thinking of this, Zhang Wei felt a wave of sadness. 100 years had passed, but he still couldn't forget the warmth of his childhood. This wasn't the cave he intended to visit this time. He had changed his mind temporarily. He suddenly realized that this trip was a bit dangerous. He must have been psychologically manipulated, as he would never have done such a dangerous thing himself. Another cave was also under the cliff but was very hard to find. He and Zhang Li had discovered it together when he was showing her the childhood toys his father had made for him. He intended to take that item away this time. It was still of some use to him now, and that woman didn't deserve to possess it. But when he reached the bottom of the cliff, he changed his mind. More than one person had been here. Zhang Wei looked at his wooden horse toy. Sure enough, someone had moved it. They still hadn't given up on his father's legacy. Zhang Wei picked up the wooden horse, walked out of the cave, and left the sect via another small path. Isn't this Brother Wei? Are you leaving the sect? You're such an ingrate, the sect has fed you for so many years. On the way down the mountain, Zhang Wei met a young man. He was the sect leader's son. The newcomer asked a question he already knew the answer to and looked at the wooden horse in Zhang Wei's hand. Zhang Wei couldn't be bothered to waste words with him. Feeling the tangible gaze behind him, he said, "You want it? Take it." Zhang Wei threw the wooden horse at the other party, who didn't stand on ceremony, caught it, and smashed it with his fist directly. A dozen sheets of paper floated out. This change was something Zhang Wei hadn't expected. Zhang Wei wanted to go up and grab them, but everything he had learned at Heavenly Palace Academy was about formation position pairing and array pairing. He had only taken the most basic magic potions and was no match for the young man in front of him. He took a few solid punches to the face, but Zhang Wei eventually managed to grab 3 of the papers. The person watching from behind stopped hiding and flew directly in front of Zhang Wei. It was none other than the sect leader. Tan Qi took the papers from his son's hand, took one look, and laughed. "It seems your father had high expectations for you." As he spoke, he threw all the papers at Zhang Wei's feet. Since this piece of trash was no longer useful, he didn't intend to keep up the act. Zhang Wei looked at the papers in his hand. A few lines of text caught his eyes. "Zhang Wei, when you are 18, it will be the 3rd year since I left you. At this time, you should be in your last year at Heavenly Palace Academy. You must be the best student in your class. Dad's words can only be used as a reference, you can't believe them completely, but Dad knows you were born extraordinary, and I didn't dare to teach you anything." Zhang Wei looked at another piece of paper. "Zhang Wei, when you are 30, perhaps you have already led the sect out of the little desolate region, or perhaps you have walked your own path. Perhaps you have already started a family. That little girl, Zhang Li, is not bad. It's just that you were always bullied by her when you were young, which made me very worried about you. You would still be bullied by that girl after you get married." Zhang Wei read the papers one by one. Every piece of paper was filled with his father's expectations for him. In his previous life, he had never discovered these papers. Even after his father passed away, he still cared for him in his own way. These papers were just like his father himself. His speech was always unhurried, and he had never been strict with him. Many times, it mentioned, "You were born extraordinary." While his father was alive, he often kept this phrase on his lips, but he himself didn't know where he was extraordinary. On the contrary, no matter how hard he tried, he was always a notch worse than others. Conversely, his father, Zhang Song, had always been mysterious in Zhang Wei's eyes. Since he could remember, he had been coughing and didn't take any medicine. He had long foreseen his own death. The Heavenly Palace Academy's formation department recruited fewer than 100 people each year. Many people only knew about Heavenly Palace Academy and were not clear about the Heavenly Palace Academy's formation department. Zhang Wei only knew that he was the only student from the formation department in the little desolate region. His father didn't know how he got him in. The sect only knew his father was a big shot and had been waiting for his father to die so they could inherit the legacy left behind. They knew his father spent money to get him into Heavenly Palace Academy, but they didn't know the vast difference between Heavenly Palace Academy and the Heavenly Palace Academy's formation department. Just like the name Heavenly Palace Academy, Heavenly Palace Academy was located in the sky, or perhaps another world. Everything in Heavenly Palace Academy served the Heavenly Palace Academy's formation department. They had no idea that the tuition for the Heavenly Palace Academy's formation department could buy half of the little desolate region. Zhang Wei even guessed that he hadn't spent any money to get into the Heavenly Palace Academy's formation department at all. But his father hadn't left him any inheritance either, so clearly they had been coveting it in vain for so many years. Zhang Wei picked up all the papers and stumbled out of the sect. Chapter 108, Encounter. Just as Zhang Wei walked out of the sect, he ran into a group of people, with Zhang Li leading the way. After 100 years of ups and downs, Zhang Wei had seen too many beauties. Looking at Zhang Li now, he found that she was just average. She wasn't very tall, only around 1.6 meters. Her hair was messy and unkempt, tied up casually, and she wore no makeup. She was wearing plain gray clothes stained with spots of blood, and she held a fiery red longsword in her hand. The only thing that stands out is her temperament. Zhang Wei commented in his heart. In his memories, Zhang Li didn't look like this, she was like other women, wearing makeup and dressing flamboyantly. As the saying goes, a woman dresses for the one she loves. Back then, she must have been doing it to please Yi Li. Zhang Wei began to hate his past self again. For over 100 years, every time he recalled his stupidity, he wanted to stab himself. Upon seeing Zhang Wei, Zhongli ran quickly to his side, jumped up to wrap her arms around his shoulders, and hung onto him. She smiled and said, "I haven't seen you for 3 years, how did you grow so tall all of a sudden?" As she spoke, she gestured to compare Zhang Wei's height. Her voice had the crispness of a young girl, but it was rather thin. It always sounded like she was acting spoiled, yet the Zhongli in his memories had never acted spoiled. Zhang Wei tried his best to suppress his disgust, or perhaps it was mixed with other emotions. In any case, he felt uncomfortable. At this moment, the other members of Zhang Li's team walked over. Zhang Wei saw Yi Li at the back. Yi Li was still thin and small at this time. In a few days, Yi Li would likely be favored by Zhang Li's father. Looking at the two of them, only disgust remained in Zhang Wei's heart. Using his hands, he pried Zhang Li's arms off his body and said, "I am a formation master. The sect has no need for formation masters, so I intend to leave." Zhang Li finally noticed Zhang Wei's coldness, but she clearly assumed it was just the natural distance caused by not seeing each other for a long time. She tried to hook her arm around Zhang Wei's shoulder again, but he dodged. Zhang Li finally stopped, saying, "I forgot that you are a formation master. You formation masters have it good, you can leave the sect at any time." Zhang Wei replied stiffly, "You can too." Zhang Li looked at Zhang Wei. She felt that Zhang Wei had become so strange, becoming someone she no longer recognized. But it was normal after not seeing each other for 3 years, so she said, "Is it the same? We were sold. Most of the time, we have no say in which sect we go to." Zhang Wei was not in the mood to chat with her. He interrupted her, cutting off the rest of her words, and walked straight down the mountain. Just as Zhang Li wanted to chase after him, Yi Li's voice came from behind, "Sister Zhang Li, Master is still waiting, isn't he?" Upon hearing this, Zhang Li had no choice but to turn around and walk up the mountain. 6 months ago, in Bolan City of the Lord of the Mysteries world, inside the Mother Goddess's red hut, the Mother Goddess still used her young girl's voice to say, "Are you still unable to contact your consciousness?" It was the same tone as the, "Only knows how to feel sorry for brother." In Frank's mind, the voice was a bit shrill. Frank replied gloomily, "I cannot contact it. Mother Goddess, can you pull our consciousness into that world?" Frank thought for a moment and said, "Yes, I have already located the world. Pulling your consciousness and my own consciousness into that world should be no different. If your consciousness enters, I probably won't be able to contact it either. Mother Goddess, then pull the 3 of our consciousnesses in. You cannot handle anything alone. We will recite the honorific name as soon as we arrive in the new world." Frank didn't argue back. He was terrible at this, and he didn't care what others said. Frank pulled the Mother Goddess's consciousness, Amon's consciousness, and Azek's consciousness into the world separately. Sure enough, Frank could not feel their consciousness within the red thin tube either. He waited for half a month, but he didn't see the 3 of them reciting the honorific name. What left Frank and the others even more speechless was that the 12th consciousness in the red thin tube was still located in that same world, and the 13th consciousness was the same. Frank did not send out any new consciousness. Frank now regretted letting the Mother Goddess's consciousness into the new world. The world on the other side clearly wasn't simple. However, none of their consciousnesses had died, so they could only wait silently for now. Fengwu Realm, Little Desolate Region. It took Zhang Wei 1 month to finally arrive at the Formation Academy in the Little Desolate Region. He had no money to take a flying boat. He had to walk. Fortunately, he had taken basic potions, which had strengthened his physical fitness, so he didn't walk slowly. Otherwise, he wouldn't know when he would have arrived. The Formation Academy had major sects recruiting formation masters all year round, and he came here intending to apply for a job. The middle-aged man at the entrance asked about Zhang Wei's purpose, and with a puzzled tone, said, "How come I haven't seen you before? Are you a formation master trained privately by a sect?" Zhang Wei nodded. The Formation Academy in the Little Desolate Region was affiliated with the Formation Department of the Heavenly Palace Academy. The top people in this academy certainly knew about the Formation Department of the Heavenly Palace Academy. If he were to say directly that he was from the Formation Department of the Heavenly Palace Academy, even if he were the last in his class, the Formation Academy in the Little Desolate Region would still give him the green light. But when the demon race attacked 10 years later, he would still be the first to be taken away to flee, and the person who took him away wouldn't ask for his opinion. That was how he was saved in his previous life, but now he didn't want to expose his identity. The outside world was far more cruel than the Little Desolate Region. He didn't want to waste half his life like in his previous life before acquiring some power to protect himself. Seeing Zhang Wei nod, the middle-aged man said, "Then do you have a formation certificate?" Zhang Wei handed a small booklet to the middle-aged man. This was what he had just obtained using an alias. The middle-aged man took it and looked at it first, saying, "Li Falan, just barely passing. Rare." The middle-aged man gave a thumbs up and continued, "Formation masters trained by families generally cannot pass the formation certificate exam. Even just barely passing is very impressive. From the Kangshan sect, wasn't the Kangshan sect destroyed a month ago? You were lucky to have escaped." Zhang Wei said, "I haven't led a squad yet." The middle-aged man nodded, clearly understanding what Zhang Wei meant. Formation masters who graduated from the academy could apply for jobs everywhere and generally wouldn't be marked by any sect. When two sects fought, they generally wouldn't be specifically targeted, they were considered to have backing. However, formation masters trained by families were generally singled out and killed. Not having led a squad meant that when a battle started, he didn't need to expose himself and could pretend to be an ordinary person. With a little bit of energy in a low-rank formation master's body, he generally wouldn't be discovered. The middle-aged man led Zhang Wei to a room, where jade slips were hanging on the left and right sides. The middle-aged man pointed at the jade slips and said, "The jade slips on the left are recruiting assistant formation masters. You don't have much experience, so start as a second or third assistant." But Zhang Wei did not follow the middle-aged man's advice. Instead, he walked to the right and examined them one by one. Sure enough, the formation masters recruited on the right almost all required work experience, or they only wanted the top students from the formation academy. Zhang Wei had expected this. Not many people would use a formation master trained by another sect. On one hand, the professional knowledge of formation masters trained by sects was generally not as good as those trained by the academy. On the other hand, formation masters were free and unrestricted. Formation masters from the academy were guaranteed by the academy and would not run away in the face of battle. Even if their sect lost a conflict, they generally wouldn't be killed. But formation masters trained by sects often ran away when they judged that their sect was bound to lose, as their lives were the most important. The middle-aged man had deliberately asked about the sect's destruction at the beginning to verify if Zhang Wei had fled in the face of battle. If he had fled, he wouldn't stop Zhang Wei from applying, but he would write about the experience of fleeing in the face of battle on the recommendation letter. Of course, formation masters trained by sects were not without advantages, they had a stronger sense of belonging. Even if it was a formation master trained by another sect, as long as they didn't think about fleeing in the face of battle and tied their own lives to the sect, they would be more dedicated. In fact, many large sects used a combination of both methods, sending the children with 5 spirit roots within their sect's territory to the formation academy and letting them return to the sect after graduation. Zhang Wei examined the jade slips one by one, but his conditions did not meet the requirements of the other party. Just as Zhang Wei was about to give up, he saw one recruiting a lead formation master. The other party had almost no additional conditions. Of course, the monthly salary offered was naturally extremely low, only 1 spirit stone per month, which couldn't even meet the basic growth needs of a formation master. Zhang Wei didn't mind the low monthly salary, even though he was in desperate need of money. If he had money, he would have built a sect directly. Zhang Wei looked at the sect that released the recruitment information, Fengxia Sword Sect. Zhang Wei thought for a long while before remembering this sect that sounded familiar. Zhang Wei looked at the address again. Sure enough, it was on the border of the Little Desolate region. 10 years later, when the demon beasts counterattacked, other sects fled, but their sect did not. They became the first sect to be destroyed by demon beasts and were called the Fool Sect. Zhang Wei took down the jade slip for this sect and handed it to the middle-aged man standing at the door. 109. Fengxia Sword Sect. The middle-aged man looked at the jade slip Zhang Wei handed over, glanced at the sect name, and kindly reminded him. This place is a bit close to the Boundary River, and demonic beasts often stray over here. The Fengxia Sword Sect has a history of at least over 1,000 years, but every time they gain some strength and want to move, trouble comes knocking, which is why they have never had the money or strength to move away from the border. Zhang Wei thanked the middle-aged man for the reminder, but he had no other choice. He knew that this sect was 80% likely to be a trap, but if he were to become a deputy formation master, it would take at least 5 years to become a full member, and that was assuming no one sabotaged him. If he worked as a deputy, many of his plans could not be implemented. However, ordinary sects clearly looked down upon this forged identity. Seeing that Zhang Wei had no intention of changing his mind, the middle-aged man stopped trying to persuade him. Giving him a heads up without any prior connection was already quite responsible of him. The middle-aged man took out his communication jade slip, tapped on it rapidly, and in less than 2 minutes, turned to Zhang Wei and said, "They have reviewed your information and agreed to let you join their sect. Just take your luggage and go to the Fengxia Sword sect to report." Zhang Wei was astonished. They agreed just like that. This was too simple. Neither party had met, there was no probationary period, and there was no division of responsibilities. "I hope the Fengxia Sword sect isn't too terrible, and at the very least, not too poor," Zhang Wei prayed silently in his heart. The middle-aged man then walked to another room and took out 2 sheets of paper. Zhang Wei used the pen nearby, dipped it in special ink, and using his magical power, wrote, "Frank Li," on both sheets. The middle-aged man waved his hand, signaling that he could leave, but Zhang Wei spoke up, feeling a bit embarrassed. "Now that I have obtained the Formation Master certificate, can the Academy provide a 10 Spirit Stone recruitment subsidy? I will repay it later." Strictly speaking, the school would only provide 10 Spirit Stones to students who obtained the Formation Master certificate as travel expenses for job hunting. It was considered a benefit of the Academy, but even Formation Masters, trained by sects could apply for these 10 Spirit Stones. When sects recruited Formation Masters from the Academy, they would provide some remuneration to the Academy, but since the Fengxia Sword sect only offered him a monthly salary of 1 Spirit Stone, the remuneration was clearly not going to be much. However, the Fengxia Sword sect was located on the border of the Little Desolate region, and it would take at least half a year for Zhang Wei to walk or ride a horse there. The middle-aged man did not quibble over these details and did not ask Zhang Wei for any paperwork, simply taking out 10 Spirit Stones and handing them to him. Zhang Wei asked for the middle-aged man's name, thanked him, and left. For the middle-aged man, these 10 Spirit Stones were nothing. But for Zhang Wei, these 10 Spirit Stones were enough to quickly change his life. The Formation Academy was located in the bustling center of the Little Desolate region. After buying a map for 1 Spirit Stone, Zhang Wei boarded a flying boat heading to the Fengxia Sword sect. Of course, the flying boat did not go directly to the Fengxia Sword sect, but it would stop at the nearest market town. Strictly speaking, the flying boat Zhang Wei was taking was not a flying boat at all, it was a Tier 2 cloud-treading beast. It was over 100 meters long, while a Tier 3 cloud-treading beast could be over 500 meters long. True flying boats did not exist in the Little Desolate region. Since it was not June or December, there were not many people on the back of the cloud-treading beast, just a few scattered individuals chatting about trade fairs. Zhang Wei found a corner and looked at the map of the Little Desolate region in his hands. Every year, new sects in the Little Desolate region were destroyed, and countless new ones were established, so there was a group of people who specialized in revising the map every year. The map Zhang Wei bought was drawn today, costing 1 Spirit Stone, which was already very expensive considering his new monthly salary was only 1 Spirit Stone. On today's map, Zhang Wei saw 7 or 8 unfamiliar sects. These 7 or 8 sects would likely be destroyed this year. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. The cloud-treading beast lowered its altitude and speed, and Zhang Wei and another person jumped directly off the cloud-treading beast. Zhang Wei rolled to dissipate the momentum, but his clothes were torn by branches. The other person's movement technique was quite elegant, and he did not look as disheveled as Zhang Wei. Looking at the market town named Black Mountain before him, with only a dozen or so shops and few people on the street, Zhang Wei had a bad premonition from this market. Sure enough, a day later, when he arrived at the Fengxia Sword sect, he realized that a sect could truly be this dilapidated. The area known as Fengxia Mountain was surrounded by a faint poisonous miasma. Except for spirit cultivators who could come and go, mortals would be locked in Fengxia Mountain for their entire lives. The total number of mortals was likely less than 10,000, and if the spirit cultivators didn't buy from the outside, there were probably no more than 20 of them. All the spirit cultivators lived on the highest peak, which indirectly confirmed Zhang Wei's guess. The sect leader was over 60 years old, perhaps quite overworked, rather thin, and his hair was already half white. Upon hearing the report, he immediately went to the sect entrance to welcome Zhang Wei. 110. Origins of the Formation Cultivator. Welcome to the Fengxia Sword sect. Zhang Wei looked rather disheveled at this moment, his clothes were torn in many places, and he bore several wounds. The sect leader of the Fengxia Sword sect was quite enthusiastic upon seeing Zhang Wei, and did not look down on him because of his disheveled appearance or youth. On the contrary, the man in his 40s following behind the sect leader, who looked 70% like the sect leader, was looking at Zhang Wei with an expression of disdain. The two exchanged brief pleasantries and introduced themselves. Zhang Wei also stated his fictional identity and name, and handed his Formation Master certification and the Academy's recommendation letter to the sect leader. The sect leader's name was sect leader Zheng Tai, and the man in his 40s behind him was his son, sword cultivator Zheng. The sect leader first looked at the Academy's recommendation, while the middle-aged man behind him took Zhang Wei's Formation Master certificate from the sect leader's hand and began to examine it. Clearly having seen Zhang Wei's barely passing grades, he immediately handed the Formation Master certificate back to the sect leader and said without any attempt to hide his feelings. "Dad, look, he got a 60. He's not necessarily better than me. If you ask me, there's no need to hire a Formation Master." Sect leader Zheng Tai took the certificate and looked at it. He didn't comment on Zhang Wei's grades, but instead mocked his son. "Back then, I spent a fortune sending you to the Formation Academy. You've been taking the exam for 20 years, every single year, yet you can't even bring back a 60 for me. If I don't hire someone soon and leave them in your care, I'm afraid they'll all succumb to demonic possession within 2 years." As he spoke, the sect leader began to introduce the Fengsha Sword sect to Zhang Wei. The Fengsha Sword sect has a total of 14 spirit cultivators, 3 formation cultivators, and 30,000 mortals. Zhang Wei thought to himself that as expected, it was just as he had anticipated, Formation Cultivator was an honorific for a Formation Master. Seeing that Zhang Wei did not ask any questions, sect leader Zheng Tai continued. "I am a Formation Cultivator, and my son, Sword Cultivator Zheng, is also a Formation Cultivator. Sword Cultivator Zheng wanted to be a Sword Cultivator when he was young, but he has 5 spirit roots, so he was destined to be a Formation Cultivator. When he was a child, the idea that man can conquer nature was popular. Sword Cultivator Zheng practiced sword techniques from dawn till dusk, but the result was that the metal attribute in his body became significantly stronger than the others. I was thinking back then, if it weren't for the fact that my wife passed away early, I would have buried this fool no matter what." Sect leader Zheng Tai told Zhang Wei the story of Sword Cultivator Zheng. Clearly, he preferred to treat Zhang Wei as a peer, feeling that his son was a generation younger than them. Zhang Wei also had 5 spirit roots. 5,000 years ago, only those with 5 spirit roots could cultivate, others would succumb to demonic possession. If the possession was mild, they would lose all reason and constantly crave slaughter. If the possession was severe, they would directly turn into a monster or a puddle of rotten flesh. At that time, humans could only live in a few territories, barely surviving by relying on the Boundary River. Because 5 spirit roots cultivators cultivated far too slowly, if it weren't for the fact that the demons at that time had no reason and only had the instinct to devour spiritual objects, humanity would have long since perished. But 5,000 years ago, a genius with 5 spirit roots named Yi Wenchen invented a formation. By using this formation, one could perceive the amount of spiritual power of various attributes within other cultivators. Later, he invented another formation that allowed cultivators with other spirit roots to use the formation to stabilize the power between them, just like cultivators with 5 spirit roots. However, cultivators with a single spiritual root were extremely rare, and gathering 5 cultivators with different elemental attributes was incredibly difficult. Only large sects had such conditions. Later, after generations of research and gradual improvements to the formations, cultivators with 2, 3, or even 4 spirit roots could use the formations to cultivate. But whether it was single spiritual root cultivation or multi-spirit root cultivation, the help of 5 spirit roots cultivators was needed to allow them to achieve balance among themselves. Because of this, 5 spirit roots cultivators were also called formation cultivators. 5 spirit roots cultivators cultivated the slowest, but the world could not do without these 5 spirit roots formation cultivators. Between sects, the destruction of a sect for the sake of spiritual objects was a common occurrence, but they generally would not take action against formation cultivators, who did not have much combat power. Formation cultivators were inherently free and did not belong to any sect. But later, formation cultivators trained by sects were not subject to constraints, and incidents of formation cultivators defecting in the face of battle kept occurring. Some formation cultivators even had absolutely no bottom line. To retaliate against such people, the various major sects also began to take action against the formation cultivators they had trained, but formation cultivators who came from the academy were generally still not killed. Chapter 111, Sect Details. The bright red robes of the Fengsha Sword sect seemed quite flashy. Upon seeing this outfit, Zhang Wei recalled more memories regarding the Fengsha Sword sect. Having been reborn from 100 years in the future to the present, many memories had been forgotten by Zhang Wei, but as he encountered more familiar scenes, more memories returned. Inside the wooden hut that sect leader Zheng Tai had assigned to him, Zhang Wei changed into the sect's bright red robes and followed sect leader Zheng Tai to the field where the spirit cultivators usually practiced. The practice field was not small, but it was clear that only 2 arrays were in use. Among the 14 spirit cultivators, only 9 have completed spirit awakening, and they require a formation cultivator to arrange their specific cultivation progress. Sect leader Zheng Tai began to introduce the basic status of the 9 spirit cultivators to Zhang Wei, and added at the end, I and another spirit cultivator will be responsible for 1 array, you will be responsible for the 2nd array, and sword cultivator Zheng will act as your assistant. Sword cultivator Zheng stood behind Zhang Wei, extremely reluctant, and began to explain the array he used, how the array was formed, and the daily cultivation time allotted to each person. Among the 4 people, there were 2 with 4 spiritual roots. Both of them, like the sect leader, had grown white hair, but they were still at the 1st rank, and it was impossible for them to have any progress in cultivation. Clearly, the reason the 2 of them were still training was entirely to achieve a 5 elements balance among the spirit cultivators, allowing the other 2 young people with 3 spiritual roots to cultivate. But it was only able to cultivate. Although the 2 with 3 spiritual roots did not have great aptitude, they were clearly faster at cultivating than the 2 old men, but they dared not cultivate quickly. Once they cultivated too quickly, they could not maintain the 5 elements balance, and the end result would only be cultivation deviation. Every time the 2 of them cultivated for a while, sword cultivator Zheng had to spend about 10 days thinking and changing the new array to form a new 5 elements balance. And that was just for 3 spiritual roots. Starting from 2 spiritual roots, once spirit awakening occurred, spiritual energy would automatically flow into the body, and sword cultivator Zheng had no way to quickly adjust the array. If it were a single spiritual root, or that mutated heaven spiritual root like Yi Li, even with Zhang Wei's 100+ years of experience as a formation cultivator, he would have no way to make such a motley crew form a balance with a single spiritual root. Back then, with Yi Li's terrifying cultivation speed, almost every day there was a change of person in the array position, and that was still the result of Yi Li not consuming any spiritual objects and working hard to suppress the speed of absorbing spiritual energy. Whenever a small sect had a genius with a single spiritual root, they would sell them off at the first opportunity, selling them to a sect with the ability to nurture them. People carry the gene to become stronger, selling them is good for everyone. Small sects earn money to continue nurturing new people, and large sects increase their foundation. Of course, their family would be treated as appendages and sent to the sect that bought them. No one would offend a genius. Once the genius grew up, they would also do their best to take care of the sect that gave birth to and raised them. In fact, most people are very willing to be sold. While it is called selling, it is also a win-win cooperation. Similarly, every sect would also sell some spirit cultivators who were not suitable for their own sect. Like the 2 old men with 4 spiritual roots in front of Zhang Wei, there were actually people who would buy them, and it wasn't cheap either. Their spiritual power would almost never increase, they had enough attributes, and they were experienced, making them the most suitable for assisting spirit cultivators who had just successfully undergone spirit awakening. Clearly, the fact that the 2 of them could survive to this day under such harsh conditions was not due to any virtue of respecting the old and loving the young, but because they had benefits that made the sect protect them. However, Zhang Wei intended to move them. Even during the cultivation right after spirit awakening, Zhang Wei could modify the array at any time so they wouldn't lose control. It would be better to sell these 2 and buy those geniuses in Zhang Wei's memory. 112. Wu Ning. Actually, buying Yi Li right now would be the most cost-effective. He should have just undergone his spirit awakening. Although the Qingshan sect values him, they believe he only has a water spiritual root. As long as a high price is offered, the Qingshan sect would still sell him. If bought now, in 1 month during the Little Desolate Region sect competition, letting him show his face among the various sects would naturally allow someone to see Yi Li's eyes spiritual root attribute. When that time comes, making dozens of times the profit would be absolutely no problem. Of course, the Fengsha sword sect obviously could not afford a single spiritual root. Each single spiritual root could sell for at least 10,000 spirit stones, which was equivalent to Zhang Wei's salary for working 1,000 years in the Fengsha sword sect. As Zhang Wei's greatest enemy, Zhang Wei would also never allow him to grow and realize his potential ahead of time. If there were an opportunity, Zhang Wei wouldn't mind strangling the genius in his cradle. Of course, Zhang Wei was only thinking about it. As a formation cultivator, his combat capability was practically zero. Without his own power, what could he use to seek revenge? Of course, whether a person is valuable does not only depend on their spiritual root. The spiritual root is merely the most important part. Combat capability and temperament are also standards for measuring a person's value. Over the course of 100 years, Zhang Wei had also seen more than one dual spiritual root successfully launch a counterattack, walking from the desolate outer regions to the middle 6 regions, and among them, there was even one with a triple spirit root. And among them, 2 of the dual spiritual roots came from the little desolate region. Of course, although those 2 were not as dazzling now as they would be in the future, they had already begun to show their talent, and they were likewise not something the Fengxia sword sect could afford to buy. One cannot make bricks without straw. Zhang Wei could only buy slightly inferior ones, and people who had not yet shown their talent. Of course, the trading hall would only open in June and December of each year, after the Little Desolate Region sect competition was completed. At that time, you could sell the spirit cultivators you were unsatisfied with, or buy the spirit cultivators you took a fancy to. The Little Desolate Region sect competition was completely public, and sects could fully choose the spirit cultivators they fancied. They could even poach the other party's formation cultivators at a high price. These things were too far away for Zhang Wei. What he needed to do now was persuade the sect master. Once the trading hall opened 2 months later, he would sell these 2 elderly formation cultivators and buy 2 young spirit cultivators with developmental potential. To persuade the sect master, you obviously needed to get the sect master's approval first. The next day, Zhang Wei arrived early at the cultivation square. At this moment, a young person about Zhang Wei's age was standing in the square, practicing swordplay without mobilizing spiritual energy. It was a young woman named Wu Ning in Zhang Wei's formation. With just a single glance at her physical characteristics, Zhang Wei determined exactly what kind of spiritual root she had. A metal fire earth triple spirit root, majoring in the gold spirit root. Perhaps to achieve balance with the other formation positions, she minored in the fire spirit root. But her fire spirit root was likely the worst among her 3 spiritual roots, with the fire spirit root probably accounting for less than 10% of her spiritual roots. Wu Ning, come over here for a moment. Seeing Wu Ning stop her sword practice, Zhang Wei called out to her. Wu Ning had already met Zhang Wei yesterday and understood that this was the new formation cultivator for their formation. She jogged over to Zhang Wei and greeted him somewhat shyly. Stand on the formation where you usually cultivate. Let me see the exact proportions of your spiritual roots. Wu Ning obediently sat down on the formation position where she usually cultivated. Zhang Wei chose the position belonging to the formation cultivator and sat down as well. After sitting down, Zhang Wei clearly sensed Wu Ning's specific spiritual roots, as well as the amount of spiritual energy stored within each spiritual root. Just as Zhang Wei had expected, Wu Ning's gold spirit root accounted for nearly 60%. Her earth spiritual root was a bit over 30%, and her fire spirit root was less than 10%. Wu Ning was considered to be in the late stage of the first tier, but the fire spiritual energy stored in her body was nearly 30%, with the remaining being 10% earth spiritual energy and 60% metal spiritual energy. A good prospect, almost ruined by poor cultivation, Zhang Wei sighed. Her gold spirit root already exceeded 60%, which was already comparable to a relatively poor dual spiritual root. Yet Wu Ning had now absorbed no less than 30% of fire spiritual energy. With that same amount of time, she could have cultivated 6 times the amount of metal spiritual energy and broken through the first tier long ago. Chapter 113, Dilemma. At 10 in the morning, the 2 gray-haired brothers, named Lu Guang and Lu Sheng, slowly strolled over, and the 4 of them began their cultivation. Zhang Wei was in no rush to change the formation, intending to observe for a while first. Both Lu Guang and Lu Sheng lacked the metal spirit root, one focused on wood, fire, and earth cultivation techniques, while the other focused on wood and water cultivation techniques. Another girl in her 20s, named Cheng Chu, focused on earth and water spirit roots. The group happened to form a stable 5 elements balance, and it was evident that sword cultivator Zheng had a solid foundation in formations. However, the progress of the cultivation now rested entirely on the 2 old men, Lu Guang and Lu Sheng. Both of them possessed 4 spirit roots and cultivated extremely slowly. Added to their advanced age and lack of diligence, the cultivation speed of the 4 was nothing short of a snail's pace. Not to mention Wu Ning cultivating metal spirit power. Even when Wu Ning practiced the inferior fire-type cultivation technique, she had to stop and wait for the progress of the 2 old men. At 3 p.m., the 2 old men ignored Wu Ning's gaze and sauntered away from the cultivation formation. Wu Ning had no choice but to pick up her iron sword and practice sword techniques without using spirit power. Sword cultivator Zheng had been practicing sword techniques all morning. The cultivation plaza was not far from the cliff's edge. Since he possessed 5 spirit roots, he did not need to worry about his use of spirit power causing disturbances to others. He was alone, wielding a broken sword and using spirit power to wreak havoc on all the flowers and plants by the roadside. This was no longer a problem that Zhang Wei could solve. Originally, Zhang Wei intended to adjust the formation to allow Wu Ning to cultivate metal-type techniques. But because the two old men were not diligent, adjusting the formation would be useless for Zhang Wei. It would be no different from practicing fire-type techniques now, as everything would still depend on the two old men's cultivation. Zhang Wei headed straight for the house where sect leader Zheng Tai lived. Sect leader Zheng Tai lived in a two-story stone house with a large courtyard, which could be considered the best stone house in the entire sect. There was a mortal old man at the entrance. After he reported for Zhang Wei was invited inside. Zhang Wei could not be bothered with small talk or pleasantries and said directly, "Can the two people in my formation, Lu Guang and Lu Sheng, be replaced by others? Currently, the cultivation speed of Wu Ning and Cheng Chu is completely dragged down by them." Sect leader Zheng Tai remained very enthusiastic, personally poured a cup of water for Zhang Wei, and said, "The 5 people on my side have perfectly balanced 5 elements, but in 3 months, the remaining 2 will be able to awaken their spirits." Zhang Wei certainly could not wait for 3 months. Zhang Wei said, "Can I trade members with neighboring sects?" Since the trading hall had not opened yet, Zhang Wei could only think of finding familiar sects to trade members. Sect leader Zheng Tai shook his head and said, "Lu Guang and Lu Sheng were also bought by me previously, but over 20 years ago, they began taking concubines, hoping to produce a child with spirit roots, but they have never managed to produce one. Lu Sheng has 29 concubines, and Lu Guang is about the same. They are dragging their families along. They could take away over 600 people from the sect." Zhang Wei was completely speechless. In this situation, it would be very difficult to make a trade. The neighboring sects would not possibly want so many ordinary people. Zhang Wei was starting to regret coming to this sect. "Sect leader, can you let me take charge of the formation you are leading as well?" Zhang Wei asked. Zhang Wei could only think of one solution now. If sect leader Zheng Tai did not agree, he would have no choice but to leave the Fengxia sword sect. Sect leader Zheng Tai sized up Zhang Wei and asked, "With so many people, can you arrange a suitable formation? Sometimes, those 5 also have to hunt demons by the boundary river. Although the combat intensity is not high and there is no need to prepare a combat formation for them, I value the stability of their daily cultivation much more than that of the other 4. "No problem," Zhang Wei guaranteed. It was evident that sect leader Zheng Tai treasured the other 5 people very much, and Zhang Wei had to show sufficient confidence in front of sect leader Zheng Tai. In fact, let alone 5 people, even if 50 more came, Zhang Wei could create a suitable formation for them. Moreover, Zhang Wei could have all 50 of them cultivate within a single formation. Chapter 114, Dropping the Book. Brothers, I'm dropping the book. I originally intended to earn some meal money through the attendance bonus, but in the end, I just couldn't keep going. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.